Tonight, we're diving into every great loss of the Harry Potter story, gently and in order, holding each name in a soft and quiet light. And if you feel like it, you might leave a comment telling us how many nights you have fallen asleep to these gentle stories, for it is always lovely to know that you are there. If these long, gentle tales bring you rest, you may wish to subscribe, so more of them can quietly find you on the nights to come. And now, settle in, let your shoulders soften, and let the room around you grow dim and warm. There is nothing here that can reach you, only a slow, tender telling of things long past and long over. This is not a story of fear, and there is nothing frightening in it. It is a kind of gentle vigil, a candle lit in a quiet room, where we speak the names of those who were lost across a long war, and remember not the manner of their leaving, but the love and the courage they left behind. We will not linger on pain, for pain is not the point. We will linger instead on kindness, on bravery, on the warmth of the people who gave everything so that others might live. Over the next 20 chapters we will walk, slowly and without haste, from the very beginning to the very end. We will start on an autumn night in a small village called Godric's Hollow, where a mother and a father gave their lives to shield their child, and where love proved stronger than any curse. We will move gently forward through the years, past a frightened teacher undone by that same love, past a brave young man in a distant graveyard, past a beloved godfather who slipped softly beyond a whispering veil. We will climb a tall tower with a wise old headmaster who chose his own ending with calm and mercy. We will follow a long and difficult journey through a darkening world, and we will pause for a loyal owl, an old and watchful guardian, a small and noble elf, and a teacher whose secret heart was braver than anyone ever knew. And when we come at last to the great battle at the school that so many called home, we will keep watch together over those who fell there, the laughing brother, the young parents, the boy who came back too soon, and all the others gathered side by side in a hall of candlelight. We will see cruelty stopped by a mother's fierce love. We will see the last shadow of the Dark Lord undone, and we will see the long fear that had haunted the world finally lifted at dawn. Then we will rest in the quiet years that followed, where the living carried the names of the lost gently into a kinder age. You do not need to hold any of it. These are old sorrows, and they are finished. Everyone here is at peace now, and nothing in this story asks anything of you. Let it move through you like a slow tide. Let each name be spoken, and then softly set down, and let the telling carry you, little by little, down towards sleep. We begin, as gently as we can, on the last night of October in the year 1981, in a small and quiet village called Godric's Hollow. The lanes there were narrow and old, lined with low stone walls and hedges that had grown soft and thick over many years, and the church at the heart of the village kept a small graveyard where the names of the long departed rested under moss and lichen. It was the kind of place where the evenings came down slowly, where lamplight bloomed in the windows one by one, and where the smell of wood smoke drifted along the cold air. On most nights it would have been a place of great peace, and even on this night, for those who did not know what was coming, it seemed peaceful still. In one of those small houses, a little apart from the rest, a young family had gone into hiding. James Potter and Lily Potter were scarcely more than children themselves in the long reckoning of years. And yet, they had already learned how to love fiercely and how to be afraid. They had a son who was not yet a year and a half old, a small boy named Harry. With his father's untidy dark hair and his mother's bright green eyes, he had learned to laugh and to reach for things and to wobble upon his feet. and he did not understand that he was hidden, or that a shadow had been searching for him, or that a prophecy spoken before his birth had marked him out in the mind of a terrible man. That man was Lord Voldemort, and he had come to believe that this child, above all others, might one day undo him. So he had hunted for the family through the autumn, and on this last night of October, he found the little house at Godric's Hollow, and he came up the garden path in the dark, with his wand already in his hand. Inside, the evening had been an ordinary and tender one. There had been the small, warm rituals of a family with a young child, the settling and the soothing, the quiet that comes when a baby has at last grown sleepy. James had set his wand down somewhere out of easy reach, for it had been that kind of gentle, unguarded night, the kind that people allow themselves when they are trying very hard to believe they are safe. And then the door was broken open, and the whole shape of the evening changed in a single breath. James Potter knew at once what had come for them. He called out to Lily to take the baby and run, and then he did the bravest and simplest thing a person can do. He put himself between the open door and the stairs, between the danger and the ones he loved, though he had no wand at hand to defend himself. He must have known, in that instant, that he could not win, and he stood there anyway, buying his wife and his son the only thing he had left to give them, which was a handful of seconds. He fell there, in the hallway of his own home, young and unarmed and unafraid, and the last thing he ever did was try to hold the door against the dark so that his family might live. Upstairs, Lily Potter heard it happen, and she understood. She had only moments, and she used them not to flee, for there was nowhere left to flee to, but to place herself between the cot and the doorway. When Voldemort came into the nursery, he found her standing over her son, and he told her more than once to step aside, for it was the child he wanted and not her. He would have let her live. She refused. She would not move away from the cot, not for her own life, not for anything he could offer or threaten. She begged only for the boy, and she spread her arms and shielded him with her own body, and she was struck down where she stood, giving everything she had so that her son might keep his small, unfinished life. And here is the thing that has echoed down through all the years since. The thing worth holding gently in the quiet of this night. Lily Potter did not have to die. She was given the choice to step aside and be spared, and she chose instead to die for her child. That kind of death, freely chosen out of pure love, left behind something older and deeper than any spell in that little room. It settled over the infant like a warmth that could not be seen, a protection woven from a mother's love laid upon his very skin. So when Lord Voldemort at last turned his wand upon the child in the cot, expecting the same easy ending he had dealt to the parents, the curse he cast could not do what he intended. It struck the boy and could not hold. The ancient protection of that love turned the killing curse away, and it rebounded upon the one who had cast it, and in that instant, the Dark Lord who had terrified an entire world was torn apart and broken for the first time. He was not truly gone, though few knew that yet, but his body was undone, and the fear he carried was scattered, and he fled from that ruined nursery as little more than a shadow of himself. All that was left in the house at Godric's Hollow was a great and sudden silence, and a small child crying in his cot, marked now with a thin scar shaped like a bolt of lightning, the only wound the curse had been able to leave upon him. He did not understand what had happened. He knew only that the two people who had loved him most in all the world were near, and then were gone, and that the night had grown very still. He had been saved, but he had been saved at the highest price there is, and he would carry the shape of that night with him for the rest of his life, though he would not remember it as anything more than a flash of green light and, faintly, the sound of his mother's voice. In the days that followed, others came to that quiet house. The great half-giant Rubeus Hagrid lifted the child from the wreckage with the gentlest of enormous hands and carried him away to safety, out of the ruined village and into the beginning of a long story. And in time the little house at Godric's Hollow was left to stand as it was, its upper floor open to the sky. A memorial that the village chose never to repair, so that all who passed might remember what had been given there and what had been lost. Let us set this first night down softly, for it is the root of everything that follows. James Potter died with his hands empty and his heart full, holding a door so that his family might have a few more moments of life. Lily Potter died with her arms around her son, choosing him over her own survival, and in that choice she wove a shield of love so strong that it turned aside the deadliest magic there is. They were very young, and they had wanted only to grow old together and watch their boy grow up, and that gentle, ordinary future was taken from them. Yet what they left behind was not fear and was not ruin. What they left behind was a living child and a love so complete that it changed the shape of the years to come. So let their memory rest here at the very beginning, in a small village under an autumn sky, where lamplight glowed in the windows and wood smoke drifted along the lanes. Let the sorrow of that night soften into something quieter now, for it is long over, and they are long at peace. Think, if you wish, of two young people who loved their son more than their own lives, and let that thought settle warm and slow over you. There is nothing here to fear and nothing to hold. Let your breathing grow easy. Let the room around you go dim and kind, and let yourself drift a little further toward rest. Now let us move gently forward, past the long, slow years in which the child grew up not knowing who he truly was, and come to rest at the close of his first year at the school of Hogwarts. It was a place of high towers and shifting staircases, of firelit common rooms and long tables laid with golden plates, and for Harry Potter it had become, in a single year, the first true home he had ever known. He had found friends there, and warmth, and a whole hidden world that had always belonged to him without his knowing. And yet, beneath all that wonder, something quiet and dark had been moving through the castle from the very start. There was a professor at the school that year named Quirinus Quirrell, who taught defense against the dark arts. He was a small, nervous man with a purple turban wound about his head, and he stammered when he spoke, and he flinched at loud noises, and he seemed to be frightened of nearly everything. The students found him timid and a little pitiable, the sort of teacher who could hardly hold a room, and no one thought to fear him. He seemed the least dangerous person in the whole castle. That, as it turned out, was exactly what he wished them to believe. For Quirrell was not alone inside his own body. Some time before, in his wanderings, he had met the broken remnant of Lord Voldemort, the shadow that had fled the ruined nursery at Godric's Hollow all those years ago. That shadow had grown weak and desperate, unable to make a body of its own, and it had fastened itself upon the willing professor, clinging to the back of his head and hiding beneath the folds of that purple turban. So there were two faces upon Quirrell, one turned toward the world and stammering, and one turned inward and away, whispering and commanding. The frightened teacher had become a vessel, a set of hands and feet for a master who had none of his own, and together they had spent the whole year searching the castle for a single hidden thing. That thing was the Philosopher's Stone, an object of very old and very great magic, for it could turn ordinary metal into gold, and, more than that, could produce an elixir that kept a person from ever dying. To a spirit as broken and as terrified of death as Voldemort had become, such a stone was the promise of everything, a way back into life and power. And so, Through the long year, the shadow drove its host to seek the stone, hidden deep beneath the school, behind a series of guardian enchantments. On the last night of that year, Harry and his two dearest friends went down through those enchantments themselves, believing they were racing to stop a thief, and Harry alone passed at last into the final chamber. There, in a great dim room, stood a tall mirror, and before it stood Quirrell. This was the Mirror of Erist, an ancient and gentle and dangerous thing, for it showed to any who looked into it not what was, but the deepest and most desperate wish of their own heart. Quirrell had been standing before it for some time, unable to work out how it would give him the stone, seeing only himself presenting the treasure to his master and being rewarded, but not seeing how to make that vision real. And now, the turban was unwound, and the second face was revealed. The ruined face of Voldemort risen upon the back of the professor's head, and the last of the pretense fell away. Harry looked into the mirror, and because he wanted only to protect the stone and never to use it, the magic of the glass placed the stone quietly into his pocket, giving it to the one heart in that room that did not crave it. Voldemort understood at once what had happened, and he commanded his servant to seize the boy and take the stone from him. Quirrell moved to obey, reaching out to grasp Harry and to hold him fast. And here the story turns upon that same old gift left behind so many years before. For when Lily Potter had died to shield her son, her love had settled upon his very skin, an ancient protection woven from a mother's willing sacrifice. That protection had never truly faded. It lived in the boy still. And so when Quirrell laid his hands upon Harry, meaning to do him harm, the touch could not hold. The skin blistered and burned beneath the professor's fingers as though he had grasped something white-hot, and he cried out and drew back in pain. Whatever now dwelt inside Quirrell could not bear the presence of a love so pure, and every place his flesh met the boy's turned to burning agony. It was a strange and terrible reversal. The frightened little man who had served the shadow so faithfully found that he could not even hold the child his master demanded. Each grasp, each grip brought him ruin, and the boy who had no weapon and no great skill needed only to be what he was, a child still wrapped in his mother's love. In the struggle, Harry pressed his hands to the professor's face, and the burning spread, and Quirrell fell away, undone by the very thing he had been sent to overcome. Yet it was not the boy who truly ended Quirrell. It was his master. For Voldemort had only ever used the man, had poured himself into him, and drained him and worn him thin as a servant is worn thin. And now that the vessel was failing and could no longer be of use, the shadow abandoned it without a moment's hesitation or care. There was no loyalty in that dark spirit, no gratitude for the years of service, no mercy for the man who had given his own body over to it. Emptied at last by the master he had followed, Quirrell simply fell, and the life went out of him there upon the floor of the hidden chamber. Let us pause here and be gentle with him, for he is easy to forget among so many braver and kinder losses. Quirinus Quirrell was not a good man, and he had chosen his path, opening himself to a darkness that hollowed him out from the inside. And yet there is something quietly sorrowful in his ending, for he was, in truth, one more person consumed and discarded by Voldemort, used until nothing remained and then let fall like an empty coat. He had been a scholar once, a nervous seeker after knowledge, before the shadow found him and made him into a doorway. What was lost in that chamber was not only a servant of darkness, but a man who had traded away everything that made him himself, and received nothing in return but ruin. As Quirrell fell, the shadow of Voldemort tore free of the body it had used, rising up as little more than a dark shape upon the air, and it fled the chamber and the castle just as it had fled the nursery years before. It could not stay, for it had no body of its own, and the stone was beyond its reach, and the boy it had come for was still, against all its intent, alive. So it passed out of the school in defeat once more, driven off again by the same old protection it could never overcome, and the long shadow of the war withdrew, for a while, into distant places. Harry knew little of all this in the moment, for the effort and the strangeness overcame him, and he slipped from waking into a deep and healing sleep, tended afterward by those who loved him. The stone was kept safe, and then, in time, gently destroyed, so that no one might be tempted by it again. So let us set this second loss down softly. A frightened man was hollowed out by a hunger not his own, and he came at last to a quiet and lonely end, undone by a love he could not bear to touch. Let him rest now, along with all the others, in the calm light we hold for them here, and let the warmth of that ancient protecting love that turned aside even the deadliest of things, settle over you as well, easy and slow, as you let your thoughts grow soft and drift a little nearer to sleep. Let us drift onward now, past 2 more turnings of the year, and come to the close of Harry's 4th year at the school, to the night when a great tournament reached its end, and the war that had seemed so long asleep woke once more into the world. That year, Hogwarts had hosted the Tree Wizard Tournament, an old and famous contest between 3 great schools of magic, and the whole castle had been alive with visitors and pageantry, with strange guests from far away and a sense of grand occasion. 3 champions had been chosen to compete, and then, by a hidden and darker design, a 4th name had been drawn as well, and so Harry Potter, too young and never meant to enter, found himself bound into the contest against his will. Among the champions was a young man of the House of Hufflepuff named Cedric Diggory. He was, by every account, one of the finest people the school had to offer, the sort of person of whom hardly an unkind word could be said. He was tall and fair and well-liked, a gifted student and a natural leader, the captain of his house team and the pride of his father. And more than any of that, he was decent. He was kind in the small everyday ways that matter most, honest and fair and quick to do the right thing even when it cost him something. Through the long and dangerous trials of the tournament, when he and Harry might easily have become bitter rivals, they instead helped one another, trading warnings and returning favors, each unwilling to win by leaving the other in danger. There was a real friendship growing between them, built on a shared decency, and it made the final task all the more its own. The last trial of the tournament was a vast hedge maze grown upon the school grounds, dark and winding and full of hidden dangers, and somewhere at its heart stood the Triwizard Cup, gleaming and waiting. The first champion to reach it and touch it would win. Through that maze, the champions went, one by one, and misfortune and enchantment thinned their number, until at last only Harry and Cedric remained, making their separate ways through the tall, dark hedges toward the prize. They came upon the cup almost together, and in that moment, each of them might have simply seized it and claimed the victory alone. But something finer passed between them. They had helped each other so often, and neither felt right taking the whole triumph for himself. And so they made a choice that was purely generous, a choice that spoke of everything good in both of them. They decided to reach out and grasp the cup at the very same moment, so that the victory would belong to them both together, to the 2 champions of Hogwarts, shared and equal. It was a small act of grace, a gesture of friendship at the finish of a long ordeal, and it should have been the happy ending of a hard year. But the cup was not what it seemed. It had been enchanted in secret, made into a portkey, one of those magical objects that seizes hold of whoever touches it and carries them instantly far away. The moment their hands closed upon it, The maze and the school and the safe familiar night were torn away, and the two young men were pulled through a rushing dark and set down in a place utterly unknown to them. A cold and overgrown graveyard far from home, in a village called Little Hangleton. The grass was long, and the headstones leaned, and a great old yew tree stood over the graves, and there was no one there to help them, and no way for them to know where they had come. They rose in that strange place, confused and wary, uncertain whether this was still part of the task or something else entirely. And then, out of the dark, a figure came toward them, a small hunched man carrying a bundle in his arms, and within that bundle was something twisted and weak and terrible. A creature that had once been a man and was now scarcely more than a waiting hunger. The small man was Peter Pettigrew, a servant long thought dead, and the thing he carried was the unborn, unfinished form of Lord Voldemort, the shadow at last drawing near to a body of its own. And in the mind of that waiting darkness, there was no place for a second boy. No use for the tall, fair champion who had come along by accident. There was only the single cold command to be rid of what was not needed. And so, before Cedric could truly understand what had happened, before he could grasp where he was or what these figures meant, he was struck down. There was no duel, no chance to defend himself, no warning he could have heeded. In one moment, he was standing bewildered in a graveyard, beside his friend, alive and whole and puzzled, and in the next he was gone, killed on a stranger's word, simply because he was there and was not wanted. He was 17 years old, with his whole bright life still ahead of him, and it ended without cruelty of intent and without malice toward him personally, which somehow makes it sadder still, for he was not hated, he was merely in the way. Cedric Diggory was the first pure loss of the returning war, the first innocent life taken as the shadow rose again, and his death marked the true and terrible turning from the years of relative peace into the long darkness that followed. He had done nothing to earn such an end. He had only been kind and brave and generous enough to share a victory, and that generosity, which was the very best thing about him, was the very thing that carried him into harm. There is a hard sorrow in that, and yet there is also something worth holding close, for he died as he had lived, having just made a gesture of pure friendship, with no bitterness and no fear that he had time to feel. What came after belongs to another part of the story, the rising of the Dark Lord in that graveyard and Harry's narrow escape from it. But there is one more thing about Cedric that must not be left untold, for it is the gentle heart of his ending. As Harry fled that terrible place and seized the portkey once more to carry himself back to the school, he could not bear to leave his friend behind in the cold grass of a distant graveyard, alone and far from everyone who had loved him. So Harry took hold of Cedric's body and brought him home. He carried him back across all that distance, back to the lawns of Hogwarts and the waiting crowd and the light, so that Cedric would not be lost in the dark, and so that his mother and father might hold their son one last time and bury him with love. That is the image to keep, not the graveyard and not the sudden green light, but a friend refusing to leave a friend behind, and a boy carried gently home so that his parents could grieve him properly. Cedric Diggory was mourned by the whole school, and his name became, for many, a quiet reason to be brave in the years that followed, a reminder of what goodness looks like and what it can cost. So let us set him down softly now, this fair and gentle young man who shared a victory and was taken for it. Let the graveyard fade and the long grass grow still, and think instead of who he was, honest and kind and generous to the last. He is long at peace now, remembered with love, carried home and laid to rest by those who cherished him. There is nothing here to trouble you, only one more warm name held in the quiet light. Let your shoulders soften, let your breathing slow, and let the memory of his goodness settle over you like a gentle weight as you drift a little further towards sleep. Let us move gently onward once more, into Harry's 5th year and down into the deep and hidden halls beneath the Ministry of Magic, to a place called the Department of Mysteries. It was a strange and solemn part of the wizarding world, a warren of dark rooms far below the streets, where the most puzzling and delicate secrets of magic were studied in quiet. There were rooms filled with slow-floating brains, and a room of turning clocks and falling light, and a great hall lined with countless glowing spheres, each holding a whispered prophecy. It was not a place children were ever meant to go, and yet on this night a small band of young students had made their way into its depths, drawn by a false and cruel vision. And there they found themselves caught in a battle they were never meant to fight. To understand this loss, we must first understand the man at the heart of it, for his story is one of the loneliest and most tender in all this long tale. His name was Sirius Black, and he was Harry's godfather. Long before Harry was born, Sirius had been one of his father's closest friends, part of a small circle of young men who had loved one another dearly through their school years and beyond. When James and Lily Potter died at Godric's Hollow, Sirius should have been the one to raise their orphaned son, for that was what a godfather was meant to do. Instead, through a terrible betrayal and a cruel misunderstanding, he had been blamed for a crime he did not commit and cast into the wizarding prison of Azkaban for 12 long years, torn away from the child he loved and left to rot among the cold, despairing guards of that dreadful place. He had escaped at last and had cleared his name in Harry's eyes, if not in the world's, and the two of them had come to love one another with something very like the bond of a father and a son. But even free, Sirius could not truly live. He was still hunted, still hidden, forced to stay shut away inside an old, dark family house he despised, unable to walk freely in the sunlight or fight openly for the causes he believed in. He was a man made for action and loyalty and open air, and he had spent the best years of his life first in a prison of stone and then in a prison of hiding, aching all the while for the chance to be of use, to protect the boy who had become the very center of his heart. So when word came that Harry was in danger in the Department of Mysteries, Sirius did not hesitate for a single moment. He came at once, along with others of the Old Order of Defenders, bursting into the dark halls to stand between the children and the gathered servants of the Dark Lord. And here is the thing worth holding gently. For the first time in so very long, Sirius Black was doing exactly what he was made to do. He was fighting for someone he loved, out in the open, no longer hidden away, no longer useless, no longer alone. Those who saw him that night said he fought with something close to joy, laughing as he dueled, alive in a way he had not been for years, restored for a few bright moments to the bold and brilliant young man he had once been. He came to Harry's side and fought there together with him, guarding the boy who was like a son to him, and for a little while it seemed almost like a triumph. And then he found himself facing his own cousin, a witch named Bellatrix Lestrange, one of the cruelest and most devoted of Voldemort's followers. They dueled fiercely, back and forth across the stone floor of a great sunken chamber, and in the center of that chamber, upon a raised dais, stood a very old and very strange thing, a tall, crumbling stone archway hung with a soft, tattered, whispering veil. The veil stirred gently even when there was no wind, and those who listened closely swore they could almost hear faint voices murmuring on the other side of it, though no one living could say what lay beyond. Sirius was fighting well, taunting his cousin, still half laughing in the joy of the fight, when her spell caught him full in the chest. It was not a great and dramatic blow. It seemed almost gentle. His body arched, and the laughter had not yet left his face, and he began to fall, slowly it seemed, backward toward the ancient archway behind him. He fell through the soft whispering veil, and the veil billowed once as though a breeze had passed through it, and then it settled and hung still again, as if nothing at all had happened. And Sirius did not come out the other side. There was no body upon the floor, no place where he had landed. He had simply passed through, out of the world entirely, into whatever quiet country lies beyond that veil, a place none of the living may follow. It happened so swiftly and so softly that Harry could not at first believe it. He had seen his godfather struck by so many spells in so many fights, and had seen him rise again each time. And part of him was certain that Sirius would simply step back out from behind the curtain, still grinning, ready to fight on. But he did not. The archway stood empty and whispering, and slowly, terribly, the truth settled in. Sirius Black was gone, not fallen to the floor to be tended and healed, but gone entirely, passed beyond reach and beyond return. And yet, if there is any comfort to be found in such a sudden parting, and there is, let us hold to it here. Sirius did not die in fear. He did not die in the loneliness that had been the great sorrow of his whole life. He died fighting for the boy he loved most in all the world, out in the open at last, doing exactly what his heart had always longed to do. He was still half smiling when the veil took him, gone before he could even feel himself fall, spared the long, slow suffering that so many endure. For a man who had lost 12 years to a stone prison and more years still to hiding, there is a strange mercy in an ending that came in a moment of freedom and courage and love, with a laugh not yet faded from his lips. He passed gently out of the world, and whatever lies beyond that soft veil, it is surely quieter and kinder than the prison cells and the hiding places that had held him for so much of his life. Harry grieved him deeply, more deeply perhaps than he had grieved anyone. For Sirius had been the closest thing to a parent he had ever known, the one person who had wanted to take him in and raise him and give him a home. That grief would stay with him, but so too would the gift Sirius had given him, the knowledge that he had been so loved, that a man would come running out of hiding and into open battle simply for the chance to protect him. That is no small thing to carry, and it is a warm thing as much as a sad one. So let us set Sirius Black down softly now, this brave and loyal and long-suffering man who found his freedom and his joy again in his very last moments. Let the whispering veil grow still, and think not of the fall, but of the laughter, not of the loneliness, but of the love that ended it. He is at peace now, wherever that archway leads, and he is at peace in the memory of all who cherished him. There is nothing here to trouble your rest, only one more warm name held gently in the quiet light. Let your thoughts grow soft and slow. Let the whisper of that soft veil become no more than a gentle hush around you. And let yourself drift a little nearer, now toward sleep. Let us climb now, slowly and without haste, up through the sleeping castle to its highest reaches, to the top of the tall astronomy tower, on a warm summer night at the close of Harry's 6th year. From up there, the whole of the school grounds lay spread out below in the dark, the black glass of the lake, the soft shapes of the forest, the distant glimmer of the little village beyond, all of it quiet and hushed under a wide and starry sky. It was the sort of high, still place where a person might feel very close to the heavens and very far from the troubles of the world. And it was there, in that lofty and peaceful spot, that the wise old headmaster of Hogwarts came at last to the end of his long life. His name was Albus Dumbledore, and he was, by the reckoning of nearly everyone who knew him, the greatest wizard of the age, and something more than that besides. He was very old, with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles and eyes that seemed to see straight through to the heart of a person, and he carried his vast power lightly, wrapped always in gentleness and humor and a deep and patient kindness. He had guided the school for many years, and he had guided Harry in particular through every dark turning, becoming for the orphaned boy a kind of grandfather, a steady presence and a source of quiet wisdom. He was beloved, and he was trusted, and he seemed to so many to be the one fixed point of safety in a darkening world, the one person the shadow itself truly feared. But what few people knew was that Albus Dumbledore was already dying, and had been for some months. He had made a grave mistake, reaching out to touch a cursed object, an old ring bound about with dark and deadly magic. And the curse had taken hold of his hand and begun to spread slowly up his arm, blackened and withered, and beyond any full healing. The most skilled care in the wizarding world had managed only to slow it and to hold it back for a little while, confining the ruin to his hand and buying him perhaps a year of borrowed time. He knew, calmly and clearly, that his death was already coming, that it could not be turned aside, and that it was only a matter of when and how the end would arrive. And because he was who he was, patient and far-seeing and unwilling to waste even his own death, he had done a remarkable thing. He had made a quiet plan for his own ending. He had come to understand that the manner of his death might be used to protect others, to spare a frightened young soul from a terrible fate, and to keep a promise made long before. And so he had arranged, in secret and with great care, for his death to serve a purpose larger than himself. He had asked something very hard of a trusted friend, and he had accepted his own passing not with dread, but with a strange serene readiness, as a man might accept the coming of a long and well-earned rest. That readiness was tested on the night atop the tower. The Death Eaters had found their way into the castle, and among them was a young student named Draco Malfoy, a boy of 16 who had been given a cruel and impossible task by the Dark Lord, ordered to kill the headmaster himself. It was a burden far too great for him, a weight meant to break him or to bind him forever to the darkness, and it had been slowly hollowing the boy out all year with fear and dread. Now he stood upon the tower with his wand raised, and the old man before him, weak and disarmed and defenseless, his cursed hand and his fading strength leaving him unable to fight back even had he wished to. But Draco could not do it. He stood there trembling, his wand wavering, and though he spoke of all the reasons he had to strike, he could not bring himself to make the blow. Dumbledore looked upon the frightened boy, not with anger or with fear for himself, but with a deep and gentle understanding. He saw the child beneath the threat, saw the terror and the confusion, saw that this was a boy who was not truly a killer and who was being pushed toward a ruin from which his soul might never recover. And the old headmaster, in his last minutes of life, spent his care not on saving himself, but on saving the very boy who had come to kill him, speaking softly of mercy and of help and of the ways out that still remained. He knew, better than anyone, that to take a life would break something in the young man forever, and he wished with his whole heart to spare him that. Then the other Death Eaters pressed forward, and among them came Severus Snape, the dark and guarded professor whose true heart no one yet understood. Dumbledore turned to him, and in that moment there passed between the two men something that looked to every onlooker like pleading and surrender, but was in truth the completion of a promise made in private long before. For it was Snape whom Dumbledore had asked, in secret, to be the one to end his life when the time came, to spare him a slower death from the curse, to spare the boy Draco the horror of murder, and to serve deeper purposes still that would only become clear much later. What seemed to the watchers a cold betrayal was in fact an act of terrible and sorrowful mercy, done at the dying man's own request and against every wish of the one who carried it out. And so Snape raised his wand and spoke the words, and the spell struck the old headmaster, and Dumbledore was lifted up and thrown back over the parapet of the tower. He fell through the soft summer night, down past the dark stones and the ancient windows, down toward the silent grounds far below, and he passed out of the world as gently, in the end, as such a thing can be. He had chosen his own ending. He had faced it with calm, and he had used it, even in the falling, to shield a frightened child from the ruin of murder, and to keep faith with a plan laid down out of love for the world he was leaving behind. There is a great and quiet dignity in the way Albus Dumbledore met his death, and it is worth holding gently in the stillness of this night. He did not rage against his ending, and he did not cling to his own life at the cost of others. He had already made his peace with dying, and he turned even that dying into a final act of protection and mercy, sparing a boy, keeping a promise, and trusting that those he left behind would carry his work onward to its close. He died as he had lived, thinking of others before himself, wrapped in a wisdom so deep that even his death was a gift rather than a defeat. When morning came, the whole school gathered on the grounds to mourn him, and creatures from the forest and the depths of the lake came to grieve as well. So beloved had he been. His body was laid to rest in a white tomb by the shining water, in the grounds of the school he had loved for so long, and the light seemed to gather around it. And though it seemed in that hour that all was lost, that the last great protector had fallen, the truth was quieter and kinder. Dumbledore had seen further than anyone. Even in dying, he had set in motion the things that would one day undo the shadow entirely, done with calm, with mercy, and with an unshakable faith in love. So let us set the old headmaster down softly now, this wise and gentle man who chose his own ending and made even that a kindness. Let the high tower grow still and the summer stars turn slowly overhead, and think of him not as fallen, but as at rest, his long work carried on by the hands he trusted. He is at peace now, in his white tomb by the water, remembered with love by all whose lives he touched. There is nothing here to trouble you, only one more warm and gentle name held in the quiet light. Let your breathing slow. Let the room grow dim and kind around you, and let yourself sink, softly and without fear, a little further down toward sleep. And so the night carries us gently onward, to a wide dark house set among cold gardens, where a long table waited beneath a high ceiling. This was Malfoy Manor, an old and stately place that had once known laughter and now knew only silence and fear. As the 7th year of our long telling opened, before the summer's desperate flight, before the friends we love were scattered across a darkening country, Lord Voldemort had made this grand house his court. He gathered his followers there around that long, dark table, and the air in the room grew heavy with the kind of quiet that settles when frightened people do not dare to move. We do not need to linger on that fear. We come here instead to hold a single gentle name in the soft light, the name of a woman who had done nothing wrong at all. Her name was Charity Burbage, and for many years she had taught at Hogwarts, in the same warm castle where so much of this story unfolds. Her subject was Muggle studies, the quiet lessons in which young witches and wizards learned about the ordinary world, the world without wands, the world of people who lived and loved and built their lives with no magic of any kind. It was not a grand or famous subject. It won no house points in the great tournaments and drew no crowds to the Quidditch pitch. Yet it carried something rare and important, a simple idea offered kindly to the young. She taught that those born without magic were not lesser, that they were not strange, that they were in every way as full of worth and warmth and cleverness as any wizard who had ever lived. Charity Burbage believed this with her whole heart, and she was brave enough to say so plainly, even as the world around her grew colder and more cruel. She had written of it too, gently and thoughtfully, defending the ordinary folk that the Dark Lord and his followers so bitterly despised. She had argued that the two worlds were not enemies, that love could pass freely between a witch and a person born without magic, that families made of both were something good and whole. In a kinder age, these were quiet, ordinary truths, the sort of thing a teacher might say without a second thought. But the age had turned. The shadow had spread across the whole of magical Britain, and in that shadow, kindness itself had somehow become a danger. She was held captive in that great house, brought before the long table where the Dark Lord sat at its head. She was a teacher, not a soldier. She had never raised a wand in anger, never plotted, never harmed a living soul. Her only crime, if it could even be called such a thing, was that she had asked her students to see the humanity in everyone, and had refused to pretend that some people mattered less than others because of how they had been born. For that gentleness, for that plain and simple decency, she was condemned in a room full of people who might once have been her neighbors, her colleagues, even her friends. There is little we need to say about the manner of her leaving, and we will not dwell there, for that is not why we have come. Above this silent table, in that cold and watchful room, Charity Burbage was killed. No one in that place spoke for her. No one rose to defend her. The room stayed still and silent, its occupants too afraid to show even a flicker of sorrow, and so she was mourned by no one at all in the hour of her passing. That is perhaps the saddest thing of all, not the ending itself, but the silence that surrounded it. A whole room of people who could not or would not let themselves grieve. And so we grieve for her here, quietly and without fear, in this soft and candlelit room of ours. We remember her now precisely so that her quiet courage is not forgotten, so that her name is spoken with warmth in a place where warmth is safe. Charity Burbage was not a warrior, and she left behind no great legend of duels or daring escapes. What she left behind was gentler and, in its own way, far harder to hold on to in dark times. She left behind the memory of a teacher who told the truth about kindness when kindness had become dangerous, who stood by the ordinary and the overlooked when it would have been so much easier to stay silent. There is a particular kind of bravery in that, the sort that never asks for a stage or a sword. It is the bravery of ordinary goodness held steady when the whole world tilts toward cruelty, the bravery that keeps on being gentle even when gentleness has grown dangerous and costly. Charity Burbage taught her students to look at a person and see not blood or lineage, but a beating heart, a mind, a soul deserving of respect. She taught understanding at a time when understanding itself was being hunted down and stamped out. And though she could not have known it, her lessons lived on quietly in the young people she had taught. Small seeds of decency scattered across the years, waiting in the hearts of children who would one day grow up and choose again and again to be kind. Her death showed, more clearly than almost anything else could, just how far the shadow had spread across the land. When a gentle teacher can be condemned simply for teaching gentleness, the darkness has grown very deep indeed. And yet, even in that deep darkness, her small, quiet light was not truly extinguished. A candle is not made worthless because the night is long. It is made precious. The very smallness of her kindness, set against the vastness of the cruelty around her, is what makes it shine so clearly to us now, across all these years, in this quiet place where we keep watch together. So let us set her memory down softly, the way one might place a single flower upon a windowsill. Charity Burbage, who taught understanding. Charity Burbage, who wrote kindly of those the world had turned against. Charity Burbage, who believed that no person was ever beneath another's love. She asked for so little in her lessons, only that her students look at one another with open and generous hearts, and in a gentler time that would have been the most natural thing in the world. She lived at the wrong hour of history for such gentleness to be safe, and yet she offered it anyway, and that offering was its own kind of quiet, shining courage. We do not remember her for how she was lost. We remember her for what she gave, for the warmth she carried into a cold room, for the ordinary folk she defended when no one else would speak for them, for the students who left her classroom a little kinder than they had entered it. Her name belongs here among the brave, held in the same soft light as all the others we will speak of tonight, no less worthy for having fought with kindness rather than with a wand. Let her rest now, this good and gentle teacher, her long work of teaching finally done, her quiet courage safe at last, in a place where no shadow can reach it. Let the cold house and the long dark table fade from your mind, and keep instead only the small warm glow of who she truly was. Everyone here is at peace now, and her name has been spoken with the love it always deserved. Breathe slowly, let your shoulders soften a little more, and let the memory of her kindness settle over you like a warm and weightless blanket. And so the night carries us gently onward, toward another name held in the same soft light, a small companion whose loyalty warmed the loneliest of nights. And so the night carries us gently onward, from a cold house to an open summer sky, and to a small companion whose loyalty had warmed the loneliest of nights. Tonight we hold in the soft light a friend who never spoke a single word, and yet whose love was as clear and steady as any in the whole of this long story. Her name was Hedwig, a snowy owl with feathers the color of fresh winter, and she was Harry's first true friend in the magical world. To understand her, we must go back for a moment to a warmer memory, to the very beginning of Harry's life among wizards. He had grown up unloved and overlooked, sleeping in a cupboard beneath the stairs, a boy who had never once been given a proper gift. And then, on his 11th birthday, the world opened for him, and among its many wonders came a small snowy owl, brought to him as a present in the great echoing halls of Diagon Alley. She was the first living creature that was truly and only his, the first friend who was glad simply that he existed. From that day forward she was his constant companion, and he named her Hedwig, a name he had found in an old book, and she seemed to accept it as though it had always been hers. Through all the long years that followed, Hedwig was there. She carried his letters across great distances, over mountains and seas and sleeping towns, always finding her way back to him no matter how far he had gone. In the summers, when he was shut away once more in the house of his aunt and uncle, cut off from the magical world and from all the friends who loved him, it was Hedwig who kept him company. In those lonely rooms, when no letters came and the days stretched long and gray, she would sit near him with her calm gold eyes, and she would ruffle her feathers and nip his fingers with a gentleness that said, without any words at all, that he was not alone. She was his link to the world he loved, and more than that, she was simply his friend, patient and loyal and always always there. And so we come, softly, to the night of her leaving, though we will not linger on fear, for there is no fear here that can reach you. It was the night the Order of the Phoenix moved Harry from his aunt and uncle's house for the last time, before the long journey of that final year could truly begin. Their enemies were watching, waiting to catch the boy the moment he left his protection behind. And so the friends who loved him devised a clever and daring plan. 7 of them took on Harry's shape and face, disguised so perfectly that no watcher could tell which was the real boy, and they scattered into the sky in 7 directions, each with a guardian, to confuse and divide the danger. Hedwig was traveling in her cage upon a flying motorcycle, borne aloft into the night beside the boy she had loved since his 11th birthday. And then, the sky filled with their enemies, dozens of them, and the calm, dark air was suddenly crossed with streaks of green and gold light. In that wild and roaring chaos, high above the sleeping fields, Hedwig was struck. We will say only that she was lost in that moment of confusion and light, still trying, in her own small, brave way, to be near the boy she had always protected. There was no cruelty in her heart and no fear that we need to carry. She was simply there, as she had always been, at his side to the very end. Her loss was the first grief of that long and difficult journey, and it struck Harry deeply. More deeply perhaps than even he expected. For Hedwig was not only a friend, she was the last living piece of his childhood, the small white thread that connected the frightened boy in the cupboard to the young man he had now become. She had been with him since the very first day of his new life, and while she was near, some part of that early wonder remained alive too. The pure amazement of a boy discovering that magic was real, and that the world had a place for him after all. When she was gone, that first innocent chapter of his life quietly closed. The war had truly begun, and childhood, with all its small comforts, was gently behind him now. Yet even in that grief, there was something worth holding on to, something warm, for Hedwig had spent her whole life giving. She had carried thousands of words between friends who could not otherwise reach one another. She had crossed impossible distances out of nothing more than loyalty and love. She had comforted a lonely boy through his darkest and emptiest hours, asking for nothing but a scrap of food and a gentle hand upon her feathers. Her whole existence had been an act of quiet devotion, and there is nothing sad in a life so wholly given to love. There is only something beautiful. Let us remember her then, not for the manner of her ending, but for the countless small kindnesses of her life. Remember the soft weight of her upon a shoulder, the patient blink of her gold eyes in a lonely bedroom, the flash of white wings against a dark sky as she set off once more to carry a letter home. Remember how she waited, summer after summer, for the boy she loved to be free again. Remember that she was the very first friend who was glad, simply and completely, that Harry Potter was alive. Animals do not understand war or prophecy or the great struggles of wizards. They understand only love and closeness and the warmth of belonging to someone. Hedwig understood these things perfectly, and she gave them freely all the days of her life. In a story so full of grand and terrible events, there is something wonderfully pure about a friendship that asked for nothing and offered everything. A small white owl and a lonely boy who found, in each other, a kind of home. Think, for a moment, of all the quiet nights she brightened. The summers when no other friend could reach him, and she alone kept the loneliness at bay. Think of the long flights she made through wind and rain and cold, never once faltering, never once failing to come home to him. She never asked whether the journey was safe or fair. She only spread her white wings and went, because he needed her, and because she loved him, and for a creature so small, that was reason enough. There is a whole lifetime of quiet devotion folded into those soft feathers, and it deserves to be remembered gently, without a single trace of fear. So let her rest now, this loyal and gentle companion, her long years of faithful flight finally done. Let the wild sky and the frightening lights fade entirely from your mind, and keep only the soft image of her at peace, wings folded, gold eyes calm, resting at last after all her many journeys. She flew so very far, across so many nights, always finding her way back to the one she loved. Now she has come to rest, and there are no more letters to carry, no more lonely summers to brighten, only quiet and warmth and the deep, easy stillness of a friend who has finished her long and loving work. Let your own breathing slow to match that stillness. Feel the room around you grow softer and warmer, and let the memory of that small white owl settle over you like the gentlest of feathers. Harry would carry her memory forward through everything still to come, and so will we, keeping her name safe in the same soft light as all the others. Everyone here is at peace now, and Hedwig, first and truest friend, is peaceful too. And so the night carries us gently onward, toward another name held in the same soft light, an old and watchful guardian who had spent his whole long life keeping others safe. And so the night carries us gently onward, still beneath that same wild summer sky, on the very same night that the friends took flight to carry Harry to safety. For while a small white owl was lost among the fields, another guardian rode high above the ground, an old and watchful protector who had spent his whole long life keeping others safe. Tonight we hold his name in the soft light, the name of Alistair Moody, whom everyone who knew him called simply Mad-Eye. He was an Auror, one of the dark wizard catchers who stood between the ordinary world and those who would harm it, and he had been one for a very long time. His face and body told the story of that life more plainly than any words could. He was scarred and weathered, a chunk missing from his nose, one leg replaced with a carved wooden one that thumped as he walked, and in place of one lost eye, he wore a strange enchanted one of bright electric blue. That magical eye never rested. It whirled and rolled in its socket, seeing through walls and through the backs of heads, seeing everything, always. It was this restless eye that had earned him his nickname, and it stood for something true about the man himself. For Alistair Moody was watchful to the very depths of his being. He had spent his life hunting those who did harm and defending those who could not defend themselves. Half the cells in the wizard prison had been filled by his tireless work, and he had paid for that work with piece after piece of his own body, and never once complained, and never once stopped. He was fierce, and he was gruff, and he trusted almost no one, for he had seen too much of what dark magic could do to ever grow careless. Constant watchfulness was the rule he lived by, the warning he pressed upon everyone around him, and though it made him seem hard, it came from a place of deep and stubborn care. He watched so relentlessly because he could not bear to see another innocent person harmed. And yet beneath all that scarred fierceness beat the heart of a true protector. When the Order of the Phoenix rose again to stand against the gathering darkness, Moody stood among its most trusted members. He had trained a whole generation of younger fighters, passing on everything he knew so that they might survive the war that was coming. He guarded others endlessly, tirelessly, expecting no thanks and asking for no rest. His whole long life had been given, quietly and without complaint, to the simple and unglamorous work of keeping other people safe. There are few kinds of courage more genuine than that. The courage that shows up year after year, watchful and steady, long after the excitement has faded, and only the danger remains. On the night the Order moved Harry, it was Moody who helped shape the daring plan, and it was Moody who took upon himself one of the most dangerous positions of all. When the seven flew out into the darkness, each disguised as the boy, each with a guardian at their side, the enemy could not know which was the real Harry. But their leader, the Dark Lord himself, had to guess, and he made his choice, and he pursued the broom that carried the greatest danger of all, and that was the broom on which old Mad-Eye flew. We will not linger on the chaos of that sky, for there is no fear here that can touch you, and we come not to dwell on the manner of his leaving, but to honor the whole shape of his life. High above the ground, in the roar and the rushing wind, Alistair Moody was struck from the air. He fell far away across the dark country, and his friends, scattered and pursued and fighting for their own lives, could not reach the place where he came down. His body was never recovered by those who had loved him. He simply passed, out there in the wide night, the old watchman, keeping the most dangerous post right up until the end, exactly as he would have chosen. There is a particular sorrow in that the man who had guarded so many others so fiercely should be lost where no friend could find him and lay him gently to rest. And yet there is also something fitting in it, something true to who he was. Alistair Moody never sought comfort or ease. He asked only to be useful, to stand where the danger was greatest, to draw the worst of it toward himself so that the young and the innocent might be spared. On that last night, that is precisely what he did. He carried the greatest peril, and by carrying it, he drew the enemy's fiercest attention onto himself, and in doing so, he helped the others live. The Order mourned him deeply. They had lost a warrior unlike any other, a man who had trained so many of them, who had stood as a kind of fierce and unbreakable pillar at the center of their fight. When they gathered again, there was an empty chair where he had always sat, and that empty chair spoke more loudly than any words could of how much the war had already taken from them, and of how much it might yet take before the end. To lose Mad-Eye Moody was to lose a great deal, for he had seemed almost too tough, too watchful, too battle-hardened ever to fall. If even he could be taken, then no one was truly safe, and the friends who remained understood that with a heavy and sobering clarity. But let us not hold him in sorrow. Let us hold him instead in gratitude, in the soft, warm light of everything he gave. Remember the endless watchfulness that never rested, turned always toward the safety of others. Remember the generation of young fighters he trained and shielded and toughened for the trials ahead, many of whom would survive the war only because of what he had taught them. Remember a whole long life spent hunting cruelty and defending the innocent, one scar at a time, one danger at a time, never stopping, never turning away. That is a life of great and quiet nobility, however gruff its outer shape. Alistair Moody was not a gentle man in the ordinary sense. He was rough and blunt and endlessly suspicious, and yet his whole life was in truth a long act of love, the love that stands guard through the cold and lonely hours so that others may sleep in peace. He watched so that others need not watch. He fought so that others need not fight. He carried danger so that others need not carry it. In this, his final flight, he did all of these things one last time, and then his long, unresting vigil was over at last. So let him rest now, this fierce old guardian. His watch finally ended, his weary and much scarred body finally at peace somewhere beneath the wide and quiet sky. The enchanted eye that never once stopped turning is still now, and he needs it no longer, for there is nothing left to guard against and no danger left to fear. He kept watch over others all the days of his life. Now, at last, he may simply rest. Let his watchfulness pass from him, and let a little of that same restfulness pass into you. There is nothing here you need to guard against tonight. Everything is quiet and safe and softly dim. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your thoughts grow slow and calm. And let the old watchman's long labor remind you that you, too, may set down your cares and rest. And so the night carries us gently onward, toward another name held in the same soft light, a small and frightened man whose story would come quietly and at last to its close. And so the night carries us gently onward, past many long months of hardship and hiding, to the cold cellar of that same great house we visited before, Malfoy Manor. Here we come to a small and frightened man whose story would come quietly and at last to its close. His name was Peter Pettigrew, and his was one of the saddest tales in all of this long telling. A story of fear and weakness, and yet also, right at its very end, of a single flicker of buried decency that had never quite gone out. To understand this ending, we must remember where his story began, long ago, in gentler days. Peter Pettigrew had once been a schoolboy at Hogwarts, one of 4 close friends who had roamed the castle together, laughing and loyal and full of the careless hope of youth. Among those friends were James Potter, Harry's father, and Sirius Black, and Remus Lupin. Peter was the smallest and the least gifted of them, the one who followed rather than led, but he was loved and included all the same, folded warmly into their bright circle of friendship. But Peter Pettigrew was a fearful man at heart, and when the darkness rose the first time, his fear proved stronger than his loyalty. He turned to the Dark Lord, and in doing so, he betrayed his oldest friends. It was his betrayal that led the Dark Lord to the cottage in Godric's Hollow. His betrayal that doomed James and Lily Potter to their end on that autumn night at the very beginning of our story. For years afterward, he hid himself away in the shape of a small gray rat, a coward in the truest sense, running from the consequences of what he had done and living always in the shadow of his own fear. And yet, some years later, there came a strange and quiet turning point, a moment that would matter more than anyone could have guessed. His betrayal was uncovered at last, and Harry, still only a boy, might easily have let the traitor be destroyed then and there. It would have been understandable. This was the man whose treachery had orphaned him, the reason he had grown up without a mother or a father. But Harry chose otherwise. He stayed the hands that would have ended Pettigrew, and he let the small, trembling man live. It was not that Harry forgave him, not truly, but he could not bear to see him killed, and so he showed him mercy. That act of mercy created a bond older and deeper than either of them fully understood, a quiet debt owed by the man whose life had been spared to the boy who had spared it. The years passed, and Peter Pettigrew returned to the service of his master, more fearful and more broken than ever. For his loyalty, or perhaps merely for his usefulness, the Dark Lord had given him a gift, though it was a cold and terrible sort of gift. In place of a hand he had lost, Pettigrew now wore an enchanted hand fashioned of gleaming silver, strong and tireless and obedient. But it was not truly his own. It belonged, in some deep and unspoken way, to the master who had made it, and it served that master's will above the will of the man who wore it. And so, we come to the cellar of Malfoy Manor, where Harry and his dearest friends were held prisoner in the dark. Of all the people in that great cruel house, it was Peter Pettigrew who was sent down to guard them. There in the gloom, the small frightened man and the young prisoners were alone together, and the long buried debt between them hung silently in the cold air. Harry, even then, even in chains, reminded Pettigrew without malice of the life he had once been given, of the mercy that had been shown to him when he had deserved none. And something stirred in Peter Pettigrew then, something small and almost forgotten. For one single heartbeat, one flicker of hesitation, the coward wavered. Deep beneath all his years of fear and treachery, beneath all the cowardice that had ruled his life, there remained one last small ember of decency, one faint memory of the mercy he had once been shown. In that heartbeat, moved by that old spared kindness, his grip loosened, and he hesitated to do his master's cruel work. It was the smallest thing imaginable, the briefest flicker of a better self. But it was real, and it was his, and it was, in the end, enough. We will not dwell on what followed, for there is nothing frightening here that can reach you, and we come not to look upon the manner of his leaving, but to understand its quiet meaning. The silver hand that his master had given him did not forgive weakness. When Pettigrew faltered, when that ember of mercy flickered in him and stayed his cruelty for even an instant, the enchanted hand turned against its own wearer, as punishment for the softness his master would never permit. And so, Peter Pettigrew, who had lived so very long in fear, who had betrayed and hidden and served out of nothing but the desire to save himself, was quietly gone. There is a strange and gentle justice in the way it happened, and a deep sadness too. The debt that Harry had shown him, that single act of mercy long ago, came at last, quietly due. It was mercy that undid him in the end, not vengeance. He was not struck down by an enemy in righteous anger. He was undone by the one small good thing left inside himself, by a flicker of the decency he had spent his whole life burying. In the very last moment of his story, the frightened man who had always chosen fear chose, for one heartbeat, something better. And though it cost him everything, there is something almost redemptive in it. A faint light in a life that had been so long in shadow. Let us hold him then, not with anger, but with a kind of sorrowful gentleness. Peter Pettigrew was, above all, a man ruled by fear, and fear is a heavy and pitiable master. He had once been a boy loved by loyal friends, and somewhere along the way that fear had swallowed the best of him and led him into betrayal and misery. He caused great harm, and we do not pretend otherwise. And yet, at the very end, that one small ember proved that the boy he had once been was never entirely gone, that even in the most fearful and fallen heart, a spark of goodness can still remain, waiting. That, perhaps, is the quiet lesson we may carry from his tale into the softness of the night. No heart is ever wholly lost. Even the smallest kindness, freely given, can echo down the years and matter in ways we cannot foresee. Harry's mercy, offered long ago to a man who had wronged him terribly, was not wasted after all. It waited, patient and quiet, until a single heartbeat at the very end, when it flickered to life one last time. So let Peter Pettigrew rest now, this frightened and sorrowful man, his long years of fear finally over. Let the cold cellar and the dark house fade from your thoughts entirely, and keep only that one small flicker of decency, that faint last light, and let it be the thing you remember of him. He was afraid for so very long. Now there is nothing left to fear, and he may be still at last. Let his long fear pass gently away, and let your own cares grow lighter as you breathe, slow and calm, into the quiet. And so the night carries us gently onward, toward another name held in the same soft light, a small and noble soul whose love was as free and pure as any in the whole of this story. And so the night carries us gently onward, still within that same dark hour at Malfoy Manor, to a small and noble soul whose love was as free and pure as any in the whole of this story. His name was Dobby, and he was a house elf, one of the small and gentle magical folk who had for long ages served the great wizarding families, often with little kindness shown to them in return. But Dobby was no ordinary house elf, for Dobby was free, and there was no creature in all the world happier to be so. To understand the great joy of his freedom, we must remember the long unhappiness that came before it. For many years, Dobby had belonged to the Malfoy family, the very family whose cold manner now held Harry and his friends in its cellar. He had served them faithfully, as house elves did, and yet they had shown him nothing but harshness and scorn. His had been a life of fear and self-punishment, of small hands wringing together in worry, of a devoted heart given to people who did not care for him at all. And yet, even in that unhappy house, Dobby had a spirit that would not be crushed, a stubborn goodness and a warmth that shone out from him no matter how he was treated. Then, years ago, near the very beginning of Harry's time at Hogwarts, everything changed. Harry, still only a boy, took pity on the little elf and devised a clever trick, a small and quiet act of kindness, and by that trick, he fooled the Malfoys into setting Dobby free. The joy of that moment was beyond anything the small elf had ever known. To be free, to belong to no master, to be able to choose his own path in the world, was for Dobby the most precious gift imaginable. And from that day forward, he adored Harry Potter with his whole enormous heart. Harry had given him his freedom, and Dobby never once forgot it. He loved Harry with a pure and boundless devotion, the kind of love that asks for nothing and gives everything, the love of a soul that has been shown kindness for the very first time. Dobby delighted in his freedom in ways that were wonderfully his own. He took to wearing an odd assortment of mismatched clothes, for clothing was the very sign of a free elf, and he wore his tea cozies and his odd woolen socks with tremendous pride. He worked where he chose and was paid for his labor, a thing almost unheard of among his kind, and he was fiercely, joyfully himself. He was, in every way, a free elf, and he carried that freedom like a shining banner. Yet his freedom never made him selfish. Instead, it made him generous, for he chose again and again to use it in service of the friend he loved. And so we come, softly, to the cellar of Malfoy Manor, where Harry and his friends were held prisoner in the dark, their situation grim and their hope running thin. And into that darkness, with a small, sharp crack of magic, came Dobby. The free elf had come to rescue them, appearing without fear in the very house of his old cruel masters, ready to defy them utterly for the sake of Harry Potter. There was no hesitation in him and no doubt. His friend was in danger, and so Dobby had come, small and brave and blazing with purpose. By his own remarkable magic, the magic of house elves that even great wizards could not fully match, Dobby gathered the prisoners to him and carried them away, spiriting them out of that terrible house and across a great distance in an instant. He bore them to safety, to a small and beautiful place by the sea called Shell Cottage, where the waves rolled gently upon the sand and the salt air was clean and free. He had done it. He had rescued them all. But as they vanished from that dark cellar, in the very last moment before they were gone, a cruel blade was thrown after them, and it found the small, brave elf as he carried his friends to safety. We will not linger on that wound, for there is no fear here that can reach you, and we come not to dwell upon his hurt, but to honor the great and shining love of his final moments. They arrived upon the beach at Shell Cottage, the sea sighing softly nearby, and there Dobby's strength began to fade. Harry held the small elf gently in his arms as the last of his life slipped away. And here is the thing we must hold most tightly of all, the thing that makes his ending not fearful but beautiful. Dobby was not afraid. He was content, and he was at peace. He had spent the very last of his hard-won freedom saving the friend he loved, and there was nowhere in all the world he would rather have been than there, in Harry's arms, having done exactly that. He passed gently, unafraid, held close by the one he had given everything to protect. Then, Harry, his own heart breaking, did something that spoke of the deepest respect. He would not use magic for this. He chose instead to dig Dobby's grave with his own 2 hands, there in the soft sand above the beach, working slowly and carefully by the light of the sky. It was hard labor, and his hands grew sore, but he wanted it that way. He wanted to give the free elf the honor of a resting place, made not by a careless spell, but by love and effort and grief. And when the grave was ready, he laid the small brave elf gently within it, and set a simple stone above him, marking the place where a truly free and noble soul had come to rest. Let us hold Dobby now in the warmest of lights, for few souls in all this long story shone so brightly. He had begun in fear and servitude, unloved and unhappy, and he had risen to become one of the freest and bravest hearts of all. He teaches us something gentle and true, that freedom is most precious, not when it is spent upon oneself, but when it is freely given away in love. Dobby could have gone anywhere with his freedom, could have lived quietly and safely far from all danger. Instead, he chose, again and again, to spend it on the friend who had first shown him kindness, and in the end he spent the very last of it saving that friend's life. There is no nobler use of freedom than that. He was small, and he was odd, and he wore mismatched socks with tremendous pride, and he loved with a heart far larger than his tiny frame. He was, as the small stone above his grave would say, a free elf, and he was every bit as noble as the greatest of wizards, nobler than most, for his courage was matched only by the sweetness of his love. He asked for nothing and gave everything, and he died content in the arms of a friend by the gentle sound of the sea. So let him rest now, this free and noble elf, in the soft sand above the beach where the waves sing him a lullaby that never ends. His fear is long behind him, his servitude long over, his freedom used exactly as he wished, in love to the very last. He is at peace, and there is nothing here to mourn, but only much to cherish. Let the sound of that distant sea grow soft in your mind, the slow roll of the waves upon the shore, gentle and endless and calm. Let it carry you, the way it carries him, into deep and easy rest. Everyone here is at peace now, and Dobby, the free elf who loved so purely, is peaceful too. And so the night carries us gently onward, toward another name, held in the same soft light, in a high and distant tower, far from the sound of the sea. And so the night carries us gently onward, far from the sea and the soft sand, to a lonely tower that stands at the top of the world. While the hunt for the Hollows went on across the darkening land, while 3 tired friends moved from shelter to shelter with the weight of the whole war upon them, another journey was being made in secret, quiet and cold and full of old memories. Lord Voldemort had learned that the wand he sought, the oldest and most powerful wand of all, had once belonged to a man now shut away behind stone, and so he turned his path toward a prison built long ago in the high mountains, a fortress called Nurmengard. It is a strange thing to speak of, this tower, for the man who had raised it had built it to hold his enemies, and in the end it held only him. His name was Gellert Grindelwald, and long before Harry was born, before even Harry's parents were born, he had been the most feared dark wizard in all the world. He had dreamed of ruling, of remaking everything according to his own will, and for a season the world had trembled at the sound of his name. He had gathered followers, He had spread his shadow across many lands, and he had believed, as such men always believe, that power was the only thing worth having, and that it would never leave his hand. But power did leave his hand, as it always does. Many long years before this night, he had been defeated in a duel spoken of in whispers ever after. Defeated by the one wizard the world trusted above all others, by Albus Dumbledore. The two of them had once been young together, had once been friends of the deepest kind, had once dreamed side by side of a future they would build. That friendship had broken in sorrow and in tragedy, and the two roads had parted, one bending toward wisdom and the other toward ruin. And when at last they met wand against wand, it was Dumbledore who prevailed, and it was Grindelwald who was led away to the tower he had made to live out his years alone in the highest, coldest cell. That is where the decades found him. Season after season, the snow gathered on the peaks around Nurmengard, and the wind moved through the empty passages, and the old man sat in his cell with only his thoughts for company. Something had happened to him in all that quiet, something that rarely happens to men who have chased power their whole lives. In the long silence, stripped of everything he had once craved, he had come slowly to something like regret. He had time, more time than any man could want, to look back upon the road he had walked, and upon the friend he had lost, and upon all the harm his dreaming had done. And in that looking back, the hunt for glory that had once consumed him had cooled and faded, and left behind a strange, worn kind of peace. Into that quiet came Lord Voldemort, seeking the secret of the Elder Wand. He believed the old prisoner would know where the wand had gone, believed that the man who had once wielded it could tell him whose hand held it now. And perhaps he expected to find a broken creature, hollowed by the years, eager to buy a moment of comfort by giving up whatever he was asked. Perhaps he expected fear, for fear was the only language he truly understood, the only coin he ever spent. He came expecting to take, as he always took, and to leave the tower emptier than he found it. But he did not find what he expected. The frail old man in the high cell did not tremble as he was meant to tremble, did not bargain, did not beg. When Voldemort demanded the secret that would lead him to the wand, and when the answer he wanted led toward the white tomb where Dumbledore now lay at rest, Grindelwald would not give it. He would not betray the resting place of the friend he had wronged so long ago. Whatever he had been, whatever cruelty he had once carried in his younger heart, in that final moment he chose to shield rather than to surrender, to keep faith rather than to sell it. And so, he met his end there, in that high, cold cell, and he met it with a strange and quiet courage that none who knew his history would ever have foreseen. There is something gentle to hold in this, even here, even in so bleak a tower. The man who had spent his youth grasping after power, who had believed to his bones that nothing mattered but the strength to command, refused at the very last to hand that power easily to another. Some small ember of the boy who had once loved a friend must still have glowed in him, banked low through all those long imprisoned years, for it warmed him just enough to say no when saying no cost him everything. He did not save the world by it, and he did not undo the harm of his long life. But he chose, freely and at the end, to be better than he had been, and there is a soft dignity in that choice that deserves to be remembered. Perhaps that is what the long years of quiet had given him in the end. Time is a strange and patient teacher, and it had had a great deal of time to teach. Alone in the high cell, with nothing left to seize and no one left to command, he had been given the one thing his hungry younger self had never wanted, which was stillness. And in that stillness, slowly, across seasons beyond counting, The noise of ambition had faded from him until at last he could hear the smaller, truer voices underneath. The memory of a friendship, the ache of an old regret, the faint and stubborn wish to do one decent thing before the end. When the moment came, those quiet voices were the ones he chose to follow, and they carried him somewhere his loud and grasping youth had never been able to reach. And so Gellert Grindelwald passed out of the story he himself had begun so many decades before. He had opened one of the darkest chapters the wizarding world had ever known, and now, in a manner few would ever hear of, he closed his own part of it with a final act of loyalty rather than betrayal. The tower he had built to hold his enemies had held him instead, and had given him, in all that stillness, the long, slow time he needed to become, at the end, a little more than he had been at the beginning. Let us leave him there gently, in the high quiet of the mountains, with the snow drifting past the narrow window and the wind moving soft against the stone. Whatever fear he had once spread across the world, he does not spread it now. He is only an old man at the end of a very long life, choosing at the last to keep a promise to a friend long gone, and then letting go. The cold cell holds no terror for us tonight. It is simply a place where a hard heart softened just enough, just in time, and where a long chase after power finally came to rest. Far below the tower, the snow lies smooth and untroubled, and the mountains stand as they have always stood, patient and unhurried, keeping their ancient watch over the sleeping earth. The war went on elsewhere, and other names still waited in the coming days. But here, for this one moment, there is only silence and stone, and the quiet after a life fully spent. Nothing in it asks anything of you now. It is finished, and it is at peace. So let this name too be spoken softly and then set down, like a candle carried carefully from one dark room into the next. Gellert Grindelwald, who chased power all his days and refused it at the end, is at rest, and the mountains keep him gently. Breathe slowly now, and let your thoughts drift down like the falling snow, settling quiet and white and calm upon the still ground. And so the night carries us gently onward, toward another name held in the same soft light. Another life we will hold with tenderness before we too let the darkness soften into sleep. And so the night carries us gently onward, down from the cold mountains and back to the wounded castle, where the last great battle was raging through the halls of the school so many had called home. The corridors trembled, the windows shattered and mended and shattered again, and everywhere the defenders of Hogwarts fought to hold their ground. Yet away from the thickest of the fighting, in an old broken building at the edge of the grounds, a quieter and stranger thing was taking place. A thing that would prove to be one of the saddest and most tender turns in the whole long tale. Lord Voldemort had withdrawn to the Shrieking Shack, that hollow, creaking house that had stood empty and shunned for years at the end of the village. He had come there not to fight, but to think, for a doubt had begun to gnaw at him even in his hour of triumph. He carried the oldest wand in the world, and yet it would not serve him as he believed it should. He had convinced himself that the wand still answered to another master, and that to make it truly his own, he must remove the man he believed that master to be. And so his cold reasoning turned toward the one servant who had stood closest to him for years, the man he trusted more than any other, Severus Snape. Snape had lived a double life so complete that almost no one in the world had ever seen its true shape. To the students of Hogwarts, he was the coldest of teachers, stern and sharp and forbidding, a man who seemed to carry a private winter about with him wherever he walked. To Voldemort, he seemed the most faithful of followers, patient and clever and utterly devoted. But behind both of those faces lay a secret that Snape had guarded for the whole of his adult life. A secret so deep that he had let the world despise him rather than let it be seen. In the Shrieking Shack, that secret was about to come at last into the light. Believing that Snape's death would win him the wand entirely, Voldemort turned his great serpent upon the servant who had never once failed him. And so Severus Snape fell, betrayed by the very master he had spent so many years deceiving. It was a cruel and undeserved ending, given to a man who had risked everything, again and again, for a cause the Dark Lord would never have understood. We will not linger on the manner of it, for the manner is not what matters here. What matters is what came after, in the last fading minutes of his life, when Harry knelt beside him on the dusty floor of that broken house. For as his strength ebbed away, Snape did one final thing, the most important thing he would ever do. He gave to Harry a stream of silver memories, drawn from his own mind and offered freely in his last moments. He had carried them all his life, and now, at the end, he let them go, so that the boy he had watched over for 7 long years might finally understand. And when Harry later poured those memories into the pensieve and stepped down into them, the whole hidden truth of Severus Snape opened before him like a door long locked and at last swung wide. For the truth was this: long ago, when Snape was only a lonely, unhappy child, he had met a bright-eyed girl with red hair named Lily, and he had loved her. He had loved her through their childhood, through their years at school, through the slow, sad drifting apart that came when his choices led him one way and her heart led her another. He had loved her still when she married another man, still when she had a son, and still, most painfully of all, when she was taken from the world. That love had never faded, never cooled, never once let go of him. It had shaped every hidden choice he made for the rest of his life, and so it was that the coldest teacher in the castle had all along been one of its bravest protectors. When Lily's son came to Hogwarts, a small boy with his mother's eyes, Snape had bent the whole of his secret life toward keeping that boy safe. Year after year, in ways no one could see, he had shielded Harry from harm, standing between him and danger while wearing the mask of an enemy. He had let the world believe the very worst of him. He had endured suspicion and scorn and hatred from those he protected most of all, and he had never once explained himself, never once asked for thanks or kindness or understanding. He had simply done the hard, thankless, endless work of guarding a life out of a love that had never died. There is a deep and quiet beauty in this, once the coldness is peeled away and the true heart beneath is seen. Here was a man who had made grave mistakes in his youth, who had walked for a time down a very dark road, and who had spent the whole rest of his life trying to atone for it in the only way left to him. He asked for nothing. He wanted no reward. He wished only to keep safe the child of the one person he had ever truly loved, and in the keeping of that promise, he became braver, by far, than the world would ever have guessed while he lived. Think of what that devotion cost him, day after day, year after year. He had to stand close to terrible danger and pretend it was his home. He had to wear the face of an enemy before the very people he was working to save, and to bear their distrust without ever once being allowed to set it right. He watched the son of the woman he loved look at him with dislike, and he could not explain, could not soften it, could not reach for the understanding that would have eased his own long loneliness. He simply endured it, and went on protecting the boy anyway, choosing the hard and hidden path over and over again, in silence, with no one to see and no one to thank him. Few kinds of courage are quieter than that, and few are more complete. And so, Severus Snape died in that dim and dusty house with her name and her memory held close. The way a man holds the one warm thing he has carried through a lifetime of cold. He did not die alone in the truest sense, for the boy with Lily's eyes was there beside him at the end, and in giving up his memories, he was, in a way, finally seen. The winter he had wrapped himself in for so many years melted away in those last minutes, and what was left beneath was only love, patient and faithful and older than the war itself. Let us hold him gently now, this man so long misunderstood. Let us set aside the sharpness of his manner and the sorrow of his mistakes, and remember instead the long, silent devotion that ran beneath it all like a deep and steady river. He gave his whole hidden life to protect another, and he did it for love. And he did it without ever asking to be thanked. That is a kind of courage that makes no noise and seeks no light, and it is all the braver for it. So rest now, Severus Snape, whose secret heart was braver than anyone ever knew. The dusty house is quiet at last, the battle far away for this one still moment, and the love you carried so faithfully is finally seen and finally at peace. There is nothing frightening here, only a long loyalty come at last to its rest, only a cold man revealed at the end to have been warm all along. Let your breathing slow and your thoughts grow soft, and let this name settle quietly beside the others. And so, the night carries us gently onward, toward another name held in the same soft light. And so, the night carries us gently onward, back within the walls of the castle itself, where the Battle of Hogwarts thundered through the corridors and stairways, and the great old stones seemed to shake with the weight of everything at stake. Spells lit the dark like sudden lightning. Suits of armor marched to the school's defense, and everywhere the people who loved the place fought to keep it standing. And among them, as they had always been, whenever the world grew hardest and darkest, were the Weasleys, that warm and noisy and endlessly loving family, standing shoulder to shoulder as they had stood through every trouble of their lives. Of all that family, there was a special magic in the two who came into the world as one, the twins, Fred and George. They were as alike as two apples from the same bough, and they moved through life together like a single bright idea shared between two minds. Where one began a thought, the other finished it. Where one grinned, the other was already grinning too. They had spent their years at Hogwarts turning gloom into laughter, filling the halls with jokes and small explosions and clever mischief. And later, they had built a shop out of that same joy, a shining place full of tricks and wonders that made even frightened people smile in the hardest of times. Fred Weasley was one of those two laughing brothers, and his laughter had been a kind of light through some very dark years. When the world grew heavy with fear, when the war pressed close and the news each day seemed worse than the last, the twins had gone on finding reasons to grin, gone on making others grin along with them. It was not that they did not understand the danger. It was that they understood, better than most, how much a shared laugh could lift a weary heart, how a joke offered at the right moment could remind frightened people that they were still alive and still together and still able to feel joy. That was Fred's gift, freely and constantly given, and it had warmed everyone who came near him. On the night of the great battle, Fred was where he had always wanted to be, in the thick of it beside the people he loved, defending the school that had been the stage for so much of his happiness. And in the middle of all that noise and danger, something wonderful happened, a small bright thing that shone all the more because of the darkness around it. His brother Percy was fighting at his side. Percy, who had drifted away from the family for a time, who had let pride and ambition carry him down a lonelier road, had come home at last. He had returned to the people who loved him, and there in the heat of the battle, the old rift was mended, and the family was whole again. And so, for one shining instant, in the very middle of the fighting, there was joy. Fred and Percy stood together, brothers reunited, and Fred did what Fred always did, even now, even here. He made a joke. He turned the sudden happiness of that reunion into laughter, the way he had turned so many moments into laughter across all the years of his life. It was a small, ordinary, wonderful thing, the kind of thing he had done 10,000 times before, and it was perfect, and it was his. In that heartbeat, surrounded by the people he loved, having just welcomed a lost brother home, Fred Weasley was as happy as a person can be. And in that same heartbeat, an explosion tore through the wall beside them, and Fred was gone. It happened in an instant, faster than grief could gather, faster than the smile could fade from his face. He was there, laughing, whole, joyful, and then the world shifted, and he had passed beyond it. We will not linger on the moment itself, for it is not the moment that matters. What matters is that he left the world in the middle of a laugh, surrounded by love, in the very act of doing the thing he did best. If a person must go, there are far worse ways to go than that. Still smiling from a joke just shared, with a brother newly returned close at his side. The grief that followed was very great, for Fred was deeply and truly loved, and the family that had always been so full of noise felt suddenly the terrible shape of the silence he left behind. His twin George, who had shared everything with him from the very beginning, from before either of them could even remember, was left for the first time to face the world alone, missing the other half of a lifelong conversation. All who had loved Fred's laughter would carry that silence with them, a quiet place where the sound of him used to be, and they would feel it for the rest of their days. And yet, and this is the gentle truth we hold on to tonight, the silence was never the whole of it. For a life like Fred's does not simply stop giving when it ends. All the laughter he had scattered so freely across the years went on echoing in the people he had shared it with. Every joke, every grin, every moment of joy he had made for someone else lived on inside them, warm and bright and impossible to take away. The warmth of everything he had given would echo on, far longer and far louder than the grief. For grief fades slowly with the years, while love simply changes its shape and stays. Those who loved him would find, as the years went by, that they could not think of Fred for long without smiling, that the memory of him carried joy inside it, even mixed with the ache. That was the final gift of a boy who had spent his whole life giving joy away. He had made the world lighter while he was in it, and he went on making it lighter after he was gone, through everyone whose heart he had brightened. A life spent making others laugh leaves behind a kind of warmth that does not go cold, and Fred's warmth simply settled into the people he loved and stayed there, quietly glowing. And the family carried him forward in gentle, everyday ways, the way loving families always do. In the shop full of wonders that the twins had built together, his handiwork went on making children gasp and grin long after that night. At the crowded family table, where the Weasleys gathered as they always had, the story of some joke he had once played would rise up and set everyone laughing again, and for a moment it would feel almost as though he had only just stepped out of the room. He had woven himself so deeply into the life of the people he loved that no absence could unpick him. He was in their laughter, in their mischief, in their stubborn refusal to let the darkness have the last word. And there, in all of that, he stayed. So let us hold him gently now, this laughing brother, this bright and generous soul who turned the darkest years a little golden. Let us remember not the sudden ending, but the 10,000 grins that came before it. The shop full of wonders, the jokes that made frightened people brave, the reunion in the middle of the battle, the smile still on his face at the very last. That is who Fred Weasley was, and that is who he remains, in the hearts of all who knew him, and now, gently, in ours. Rest now, Fred Weasley, still smiling, still loved, still filling the quiet with the warmth of everything you gave. There is nothing frightening here, only a bright soul who went out laughing and left behind more joy than grief. Let the memory of him settle soft and warm about you, like a kind of gentle glow in a darkened room, and let your own heart ease. Breathe slowly now, and let the warmth carry you downward toward rest. And so the night carries us gently onward, toward another name held in the same soft light. And so the night carries us gently onward, still within the walls of the wounded castle, still amid the long and terrible night of the great battle, to two more names that belong together as their lives belong together. For elsewhere in that same fighting, in another corridor lit by the flash of spells, two young people fought side by side who had only just begun the sweetest chapter of their lives. They had only lately become parents, and they had left behind, safe in another's care, a tiny infant son who was waiting for them to come home. The first of them was Remus Lupin, a gentle and weary man whose whole life had been marked by a burden he had carried since he was a small child. Long ago he had been bitten by a werewolf, and ever after, at the turning of each full moon, he had been forced to endure a change he never asked for and never wanted. That affliction had shadowed his whole life, had shut doors against him, had made him a man who expected loneliness and rejection, and who was gently astonished whenever he found kindness instead. And yet, through all of it, Remus remained one of the kindest souls in the entire story, patient and thoughtful and quietly brave. A man who had known suffering and had chosen tenderness in return. To Harry, Remus had been a teacher first, one of the very best he ever had, a man who taught him not only spells but confidence, who saw the frightened boy behind the famous name and treated him with a steady, quiet care. And more than that, Remus had been one of Harry's father's dearest friends, one of the small band of companions who had loved James Potter in their school days. In Remus, Harry found a living thread back to the parents he had lost, a warm and gentle link to the family that had been taken from him before he could remember them. For that alone, Harry loved him deeply. Beside Remus fought Nymphadora Tonks, though she never cared for her first name and much preferred to be known simply by her last. She was young and bright and brave, an Auror trained to fight the dark, and she carried within her a wonderful gift. For she could change her appearance at will, most often delighting those around her by turning her hair a cheerful, startling shade of pink. She was warm and funny and full of life, a little clumsy in the most endearing way, and she had a heart that ran toward those in need rather than away from them. She had loved Remus steadily and stubbornly, refusing to be turned aside by all his gentle protests that he was too poor, too old, too dangerous, too marked by his affliction to deserve her. She had loved him anyway, until at last he let himself be loved, and they had married, and they had made a small and hopeful family in the middle of a darkening world. And then had come the greatest joy of both their lives, a son, a tiny boy named Teddy. He had been born in the shadow of the war, but he had been born into love, wanted and cherished from his very first breath. When the call came to defend Hogwarts, Remus and Tonks made the hardest choice that any parents can make. They left their infant son at home, safe in the care of his grandmother, and they went together to fight for the world he would grow up in. They went so that Teddy might live in a kinder age than the one they were struggling through, so that the darkness would not be waiting for him when he was grown. Both of them fell in the defense of the school that night, dying not far apart, so that, in the end, they were not divided even by that. They had come into the fullness of their happiness so recently, had held their newborn son so lately in their arms, and they gave it all up together for the sake of the future. Their little boy would grow up, never truly knowing them, never keeping a single memory of their faces or their voices, and that is perhaps the most tender sorrow in all of this long telling. And yet, he would grow up knowing them all the same through the stories others told, through the love that surrounded him always, through the accounts of who his parents had been and what they had given. For Teddy would not be alone, and that is the gentle heart of it. He would be raised in love, watched over and cherished, told again and again of the gentle teacher and the bright young Auror who had been his mother and his father. He would learn that they had gone to fight so that he might be safe, that their last great act in the world had been an act of love for him. He would grow up an orphan, yes, but an orphan wrapped warmly in the memory of parents who had adored him, and that memory would be a kind of home he could always return to. There was one who understood this loss more deeply than most, and that was Harry himself. For Harry, too, had been an orphan, left as an infant when his own parents gave their lives to shield him. He knew, better than anyone, what it was to grow up without a mother and a father, to know them only through the stories and the love of others. And so, standing in the grief of that night, Harry felt this loss with a special ache, and he made a quiet promise deep in his own heart. He would watch over the boy that Remus and Tonks had left behind. He would be there for Teddy in the way that so many good people had been there for him. The orphan would look after the orphan, and the circle of care would go on unbroken. There is something profoundly comforting in that promise when you sit with it in the quiet. It means that love, given freely, does not vanish when those who gave it are gone. It passes on. It is caught up and carried forward by others and poured out again onto the next small life that needs it. Remus and Tonks gave everything they had, and the love they left behind did not die with them. It was gathered up gently and given to their son, so that he would never truly be without it, so that he would always have been loved, from the very beginning and all through the years to come. And Teddy would grow, as all children grow, into a boy and then a young man surrounded by a whole warm circle of people who had loved his parents and now loved him for their sake and for his own. His grandmother would raise him with steady tenderness, and the wide, noisy, generous family that had gathered around Harry would gather around Teddy too, so that he never wanted for a place at a table or a hand to hold. He would hear, again and again, of his father's gentleness and his mother's laughter, of the kindness that no affliction could darken and the brightness that no danger could dim. He would carry them with him always, not as a wound, but as a warmth. Two people he never met, and yet somehow always knew, held safe inside him in the shape of the love they had left behind. So let us hold them gently now, these two young parents who fought and fell together for the sake of a child they would not live to raise. Let us remember Remus for his kindness, hard-won and freely given, and Tonks for her brightness and her stubborn, faithful love, and both of them for the courage that carried them into that final night. They left the world side by side, and they left behind a son wrapped in love, and that is a legacy far greater than sorrow. Rest now, Remus and Nymphadora, together as you always wished to be, your little boy safe and cherished, and held in the arms of those who loved you. There is nothing frightening here, only two brave hearts at peace, and a love that went on living after them. Let the thought of that love settle soft and warm about you, and let your own breathing slow and deepen toward rest. And so the night carries us gently onward, toward another name held in the same soft light. And so the night carries us gently onward, still within the great battle at the school, to one of the smallest and youngest of all the names we hold tonight, a boy whose courage was far larger than his years. Among the many who came back to defend Hogwarts, among the grown wizards and the trained fighters and the seasoned members of the Order, there was a slight and eager child named Colin Creevey, and his story is one of pure and simple devotion, the kind that shines all the brighter for how young and how ordinary he was. Colin had come to Hogwarts a few years behind Harry, and from almost the very first day he had been enchanted by everything about the magical world. Everything about it delighted him. Every moving staircase, every talking portrait, every strange and wonderful creature, every ordinary lesson that would have seemed miraculous to anyone who had grown up as he had, in a family without a drop of magic. He had arrived from the world of ordinary folk, the child of a milkman, and to him the whole of Hogwarts was a dream he could hardly believe he was allowed to live inside. He walked through it wide-eyed with wonder, drinking in every detail, treasuring things that others had long since stopped noticing. And he had a camera, a small and beloved thing that he carried nearly everywhere, forever raising it to capture one more image of the astonishing world he had found himself in. In his early days, he had followed Harry about with an eager, breathless admiration, wanting only to be near the boy whose story he had heard, wanting a picture, a word, a moment. There was something so open and unguarded in that admiration, so free of any shadow, that it could not help but be endearing. Colin was simply, wholly, joyfully glad to be part of the magical world, glad to be at the school, glad to be alive in a place so full of wonder. He asked for nothing more than to belong to it. When the great battle came to Hogwarts, Colin was among those judged too young to fight. He was still only a boy, well below the age of the students who were permitted to stay and defend the castle, and so, along with the other youngest ones, he was sent away to safety. That was the right and careful thing, to keep the children out of the danger, to send the smallest of them somewhere the fighting could not reach. And Colin, had he stayed away, would have been safe, and no one would have thought a moment less of him, for no one expected so young a boy to stand in the middle of a war. But Colin loved the school too much to leave it in its hour of greatest need. Somewhere in the confusion of that night, he slipped back. He crept away from the safety he had been sent to, and made his way back to the castle, back to the place he loved more than anywhere in the world, so that he might stand with it when it needed defending. He was too young to be counted among the fighters, and he knew it, and he came back anyway, drawn by a loyalty and a love that were far too large for his small frame to hold. He would not let the place that had welcomed him, the world that had opened its doors to a boy from a house without magic, face its darkest night without him. And so, when the fighting paused at last and a heavy quiet fell over the grounds, Colin Creevey was found among the fallen. He was one of the very youngest to give everything for the cause, a boy who should have been safely far away, who had chosen instead to come back and stand with the school he loved. We will not linger on the sorrow of it, for the sorrow is not the whole of the story, and it is not the part we most need to remember. What we most need to remember is the love that brought him back, and the courage, quiet and enormous, that lived inside so small a heart. For his courage was far larger than his years, and it stood for something far larger than himself. Colin was not a hero of the great and famous kind. He was not powerful. He was not old enough. He was not one of the names the whole world knew. He was simply a boy who loved his school and his newfound world with his whole heart, and who could not bear to be safe while it was in danger. And in that, he stood for all the ordinary students who chose to stay, all the young ones who could have fled and did not, all the countless small acts of bravery that never made the great stories, but without which the great stories could never have ended well. There is something deeply moving in that when you sit quietly with it. The war was not won only by the mighty and the famous. It was won also by the small and the young and the ordinary, by children like Colin who loved their home enough to defend it, who gave what little they had because it was theirs to give, and because love left them no other choice. His camera, which had captured so many bright and happy moments, which had recorded his endless wonder at the magical world, becomes in memory a kind of gentle symbol, a reminder of how much he had loved simply being alive in that astonishing place, and how fiercely he had wished to keep it safe. Think of all the small pictures that Camera had taken across his years at the school, all the moving photographs of friends laughing, of feasts in the great hall, of ordinary afternoons that must have seemed to him like the most wonderful thing in the world. Each one was a little act of love, a way of saying that this place and these people mattered, that he never wanted to forget a single moment of the gift he had been given. And when the school he had loved so dearly stood in danger, that same love that had lifted his camera 1,000 times lifted him instead and carried him back through the dark to stand where he felt he belonged. It was the same devotion all along, only grown, in that final hour, into something as brave as anything the older fighters did. And so his memory shines gently among the many, one small light set beside all the others, no less bright for being small. He is remembered here not for the manner of his ending, but for the open-hearted wonder of his life, for the joy he took in every ordinary marvel, for the loyalty that would not let him stay safely away. He stood for all the ones like him, the young and the eager and the ordinary, who chose to give everything, and in remembering him, we remember all of them. Every quiet and unsung act of courage on that long night. So let us hold him gently now, this small and eager boy with his beloved camera, this child who loved a school so much that he came back to defend it. Let us remember the wonder in his eyes, the pictures he took, the pure and simple gladness he felt at being part of a world he had thought impossible. That gladness was his gift, and his courage was his farewell, and both of them shine on, soft and warm, among the many lights we keep watch over tonight. Rest now, Colin Creevey, youngest of the brave, your wonder undimmed and your love remembered, your small light shining gently among all the others. There is nothing frightening here, only a boy who loved the world too much to leave it undefended, at peace now and held in kindness. Let the warmth of his story settle soft about you, and let your own eyes grow heavy and your breathing slow. Breathe gently now, and let the quiet carry you downward toward rest. And so the night carries us gently onward, toward another name held in the same soft light. And so we come to the strange, hushed middle of that long night, the moment when the first half of the battle ended and an uneasy silence settled over the wounded castle. The spells had stopped. The great stones had stopped trembling. For a little while, a truce hung in the air, like the pause between one breath and the next. And in that fragile quiet, the defenders of Hogwarts did the oldest and gentlest thing that the living have always done for the fallen. They went out into the smoke and the rubble, and one by one they gathered their dead, and they carried them home into the light. The great hall, which for so many years had been a place of warmth and laughter and long feasts beneath the enchanted ceiling, became that night a place of tender keeping. The 4 long house tables had been pushed aside, and the wide floor was cleared, and there the fallen were laid down side by side in careful rows. Above them, the enchanted ceiling still showed the sky as it truly was, a deep and softening dark, drifting slowly toward the first gray promise of morning, and the floating candles burned low and steady, casting a gold and gentle light over every face turned upward in rest. They carried Fred Weasley in from the corridor where the wall had fallen, and they laid him down among his own, and all the red-haired family who had loved his laughter gathered close around him. They carried in Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks, the young husband and the young wife who had fought not far apart and who now lay near one another, quiet at last, their long day of danger finally over. They carried in small Colin Creevey, who had crept back too soon to stand with the school he adored, and they set him gently among the older ones, so that even the youngest of them would not lie alone. And among the lost of that night there was also Vincent Crabbe, a boy from Slytherin who had been caught in a cursed and hungry fire of his own making in the high-hidden room called the Room of Requirement, a fire that had grown beyond all holding and taken him before he could be pulled from it. He too was one of the fallen of that terrible night. A young life ended in the great confusion, and he was not forgotten in the counting of the lost. There is something almost holy in a room where grief is shared, and the great hall that night held grief the way a cupped pair of hands holds water, carefully, so that none of it should spill and none of it should be lost. Families knelt beside the ones they had lost. Mothers smoothed the hair of children they had raised from cradle to groan. Fathers sat very still, with a hand upon a shoulder that would not wake. Friends who had grown up together in those very halls now bent over one another in silence. And the whole school, students and teachers alike, those from every house and every year, shared a single and enormous sorrow, so wide and so deep that no one had to carry it alone. It is worth pausing here, in the calm of your own quiet room, to let that gentleness settle over you as it settled over them. For the terror of the fighting had gone out of the hall, and what remained was only love. Love in its plainest and most patient form. The love that stays beside the beloved when there is nothing left to be done but to stay. No spells could help now. No cleverness, no courage in battle, no last brave stand. There was only the keeping of watch, the simple and ancient act of not leaving the dead to lie alone in the dark. And so they kept it, together in the candlelight. Madame Pomfrey and her helpers moved softly among the many wounded who lay along the edges of the hall, tending the living with the same tenderness that others showed the fallen, binding what could be bound, easing what could be eased, murmuring low and steady comfort to those who trembled. The ghosts of the castle drifted through, pale and sorrowing, keeping their own kind of vigil. House elves came up quietly from the kitchens far below and moved among the mourners with cups of warm water, and small kindnesses passed from hand to hand without any need for words. In the midst of the greatest ruin the school had ever known, the ordinary work of care went gently on, and that, more than any triumph, was the truest heart of Hogwarts. Harry moved through that hall as through a dream, and everywhere he looked, he saw a face he knew. A person who had lived and laughed and studied within these walls, and who had chosen to stay and defend them. He saw the Weasleys gathered around Fred, and he felt the enormous weight of all that had been given, and he understood, more deeply than ever before, that every name laid down upon that floor had once been someone's whole world. He did not look away. He let himself see them, each one, and in seeing them he honored them. For to be seen and to be remembered is a kind of gift that the living can still give the dead. This was the quiet center of the whole long night, the still point around which everything else turned. Before it there had been the fury of the first assault, and after it, there would come the final and decisive hours. But here, in this pause, there was only mourning and only love. It was a hall of candlelight, and every candle seemed to stand for a life, small and warm and steadfast against the dark. The living held their vigil over the fallen, and in that keeping they gathered, slowly and without hurry, the strength they would need to go on. Grief, held together, does not grow lighter, but it grows more bearable, and shoulder set beside shoulder, the people of Hogwarts found that they could stand. Outside, the night was turning. Beyond the tall windows, the sky had begun that slow and secret change that comes in the last hours before dawn, when the black softens toward gray and the stars grow faint and far. Inside, the candles burned lower, and the murmurs grew softer, and here and there someone, worn out at last by sorrow and by fear, let their heads sink down and drifted for a little while into an exhausted and merciful sleep. There is a rest that comes even in the hardest of nights, a rest the body claims whether we will it or not, and it came to many of them there, in that hall, surrounded by the ones they loved, both the living and the lost. Let it come to you as well. There is nothing here that can reach you, nothing in this old and finished sorrow that asks anything of you now. These names were laid down long ago, and they rest now in a peace that no battle can trouble. Let the image of that candlelit hall hold you gently, the low gold light, the quiet company, the shared and softened grief that no one had to bear alone. Let your own shoulders loosen, and your own breathing slow, and feel how good it is simply to be safe and warm and still. For a vigil is not only a keeping of the dead, it is also a tenderness the living offer to one another, a way of saying, without any words at all, that no one need be alone in the dark. And so, in the deepening quiet of that long night, the fallen lay in candlelight, and the living kept their watch, and the whole wounded castle breathed slowly toward the coming day. Rest here a while, in that gentle keeping, and let the soft gold light carry you onward into the next quiet turning of the night. And so the night carries us onward, out of the candlelit calm of the vigil and into the last surge of the battle, where the fighting rose once more through the great halls of the castle. When the uneasy truce had ended, and the defenders had gathered their strength, the enemy came again, and the great hall itself, so lately a place of mourning, became the very heart of the final struggle. Yet even here, in the fiercest hour, this is not a story of terror. It is the story of how a mother's love rose up, plain and unbreakable, and stopped the cruelty that had haunted so many for so long. Among all who followed Lord Voldemort, none was more devoted or more merciless than Bellatrix Lestrange. She had given her whole self over to the dark, and she fought that night as though it were a wild and joyful thing, laughing amid the smoke and the ruin, delighting in the fear she spread. She was a witch of terrible skill, cruel and swift, and she moved through the battle like a storm, and few dared to stand before her. She had done great harm across the long war, and she had shown mercy to no one, and now, in the final hours, she dueled in the middle of the great hall with 3 young women arrayed against her at once, and still she laughed. One of those 3 was Ginny Weasley, the youngest of the great red-haired family and its only daughter, brave and quick and utterly unwilling to leave the fight to others. She had grown up in a house full of brothers, and she had learned early to hold her own, and now she stood against the cruelest of the Death Eaters without flinching. But Bellatrix was old in the dark arts and pitiless in her strength, and there came a moment when one of her curses flashed close, too close, streaking past Ginny by only a hand's breadth and striking the floor where she had stood. It missed. But it had come near enough to freeze the blood, near enough that any who loved the girl felt the whole world lurch toward a grief it could not have borne. And her mother saw it. Molly Weasley had spent her life in the warm and ordinary work of raising a family, in kitchens and gardens, in mending and cooking and comforting, in the thousand small and tender labors that make a home. She had brought 7 children into the world and loved every one of them with her whole heart. And she had knitted their jumpers and healed their scraped knees and stayed awake through their fevers, and never once in all those years had anyone thought to call her a warrior. She was gentle. She was homely. She was the soft center around which the whole Weasley family turned. But there is a fierceness that sleeps inside the gentlest of people, a fierceness that wakes only when what they love is threatened. And in that moment, seeing the curse pass so near her only daughter, Molly Weasley woke to it entirely. She stepped forward, and she put herself between the dark witch and her child, and she took up the duel alone. What followed was a clash that none who saw it ever forgot, for the quiet homemaker met the practiced cruelty of Bellatrix Lestrange spell for spell, and did not give ground. All the love of a lifetime, all the fear she had carried for her children through year upon year of war, all the grief she had only just begun to feel for the son she had lost that very night, gathered together inside her, and became a strength that no cruelty could match. She fought not for glory and not for hatred, but for the simplest and most powerful reason there is, because her children were behind her, and she would not let them be harmed. Bellatrix, for all her scorn, found that she could not break the guard of the mother before her. She mocked and she laughed, as she always had, but the laughter meant nothing against the steady, blazing purpose that had risen in Molly Weasley. Blow answered blow across the trembling hall. And then, in a single decisive moment, it was Molly whose curse struck true. And the cruelest of all the dark witches, she who had killed and tortured and terrorized across 2 long wars, fell at last and moved no more. The one who had brought so much sorrow to so many was finally, quietly stopped, and the harm she carried in her hands could reach no further. There is a deep and gentle justice in the way it ended. It was not the greatest of warriors who brought her down, nor the most famous, nor the most powerful in the eyes of the world. It was not a soldier hardened by years of battle, nor a duelist famed across the land, nor anyone whose name struck fear into the enemy. It was a mother defending her children. It was love in its most protective and most human form. The love that stands in the doorway and will not step aside. The same love that had begun this whole long story on an autumn night in Godric's Hollow, when another mother had refused to move from her son's cot. And here, at the very end, that same fierce and shielding love rose once more, and proved again what it had proved so long before, that in this world there is no force darker or crueler than love is strong. For a heartbeat the hall seemed to hold its breath. Then the fighting closed over the moment and rushed on, for the battle was not yet finished, and the greatest danger of all still remained. But something had shifted, quietly and for good. The dark witch who had haunted the dreams of so many, who had taken a beloved godfather beyond a whispering veil and left ruin wherever she went, would take nothing more from anyone. Her long career of cruelty was over, ended by the fury of an ordinary woman who loved her family more than she feared any darkness. Let that thought rest gently with you now, in the warmth and safety of your quiet room. For it is a comforting thing to know, as you drift toward sleep, that cruelty does not have the last word, and that the gentlest hearts hold within them a strength that the cruel can never understand. The people who love us, plainly and steadily, in kitchens and gardens and around ordinary tables, carry inside them a fierce and shielding power, and it is that power, in the end, that guards the world. It is not loud, and it does not seek glory, and most of the time it shows itself only in small and tender ways. But when it is needed, it rises, and nothing can stand against it. So let the noise of that last battle fade from your mind, and keep only the quiet truth at its center. A mother stood before her child, and love met cruelty, and love won. The hall grew a little safer for it, and the long fear that had gripped so many hearts loosened by a single crucial degree. Molly Weasley stepped back among her family, and her children were safe, and the woman who had spread so much sorrow could spread it no longer. The night was nearly spent now, the deep dark beyond the windows softening toward the first pale gray of the coming dawn. Only one shadow remained to be lifted, and the paths of the story were drawing together toward their quiet end. But you need not follow them tonight into any fear, for there is none left here for you. Let your breathing slow, and your thoughts grow gentle, and hold close instead the memory of that shielding love, warm and steadfast and enough. And so the night carries us softly onward, toward the last quiet turnings that remain, held in the same calm and gentle light. And so we come to a quieter kind of ending, one that took place not with a great cry, but with a single, clean, and courageous stroke, and that undid in one heartbeat the long and terrible secret by which the Dark Lord had kept himself in the world. To understand it, we must go back gently, as through all these years, and remember how it was that Lord Voldemort had come to seem beyond the reach of death at all. Through all the long seasons of his rising and his fall and his rising once more, Voldemort had done a thing so dark and so unnatural that few had ever dared to attempt it. He had torn his own soul into pieces, again and again, and hidden each fragment away inside some object or some creature, so that even if his body were destroyed, the broken shards of his self would keep him tethered to life. These hidden pieces were called Horcruxes, and they were the true and secret source of all his terrible endurance. It was because of them that he had not truly died on that autumn night in Godric's Hollow, when the curse he cast at an infant had rebounded upon him. And it was because of them that he could not be finished for good until every last one of them had been found and unmade. One by one, across a long and difficult hunt, those hidden fragments had been sought out and destroyed, some by Harry and his dearest friends, some by others who had joined the quiet, patient work without ever knowing the whole of it. It was labor done in secret and in danger, over many months and across many miles, and it had cost a great deal. But by the last hours of the battle at Hogwarts, almost all of the fragments were gone, and only one still remained alive in the world. That final living piece of the Dark Lord's soul dwelt within his great serpent, Nagini, the enormous snake that went always at his side and that he guarded above all things. As long as she lived, and the fragment within her lived, Lord Voldemort could not truly die, no matter what befell his body. She was the last thread holding him to the world, and everyone who understood the truth knew that she had to be the last thing undone. But Nagini was fiercely protected, kept close and shielded by her master's power, and to reach her seemed almost impossible. It would take someone brave enough to stand in the very worst of the danger, and quick enough to strike at the one moment that presented itself, and willing to risk everything on a single chance. And the one who rose to that task was perhaps the last person that anyone, years before, would ever have expected. Neville Longbottom had come to Hogwarts as a shy and forgetful boy, round-faced and anxious, forever losing his belongings and forever afraid of getting things wrong. For a long time he had seemed the gentlest and the least sure of all his year, a boy who tripped over his own feet and startled at loud noises, kind to everyone, and confident of nothing. Yet all through the years he had been growing, quietly, in a way that no one had fully seen, and the war had drawn out of him a courage that had always been there, waiting beneath the shyness. In that last dark year, when the castle had fallen under cruel hands, it had been Neville who kept hope alive within its walls. Neville who stood up again and again, no matter how he was struck down. Neville who became, without ever meaning to, the heart of all who refused to give in. And now, in the ruined courtyard, as the final duel drew near and all seemed lost, Neville Longbottom stood forth. Wounded and weary, in front of the whole gathered host of the enemy, he did not falter. From the old and battered sorting hat, the same hat that had sorted every student for 1,000 years, there came to his hand the shining silver sword of Godric Gryffindor, the ancient blade that presents itself only to a true and worthy heir of that brave house. It came to Neville because he had earned it, because in the depths of his gentle heart there burned a courage as pure as any the school had ever known. He took up the sword, and he did not stop to think of his own safety, and with a single brave and certain stroke he brought the blade down upon the great serpent, and severed its head from its body. In that instant the last living fragment of the Dark Lord's soul was destroyed. The final thread was cut. The long, patient, secret work of many hands, carried out across so many months and at such great cost, was quietly complete. And though few in that courtyard fully understood what had just happened, everything had changed. For with Nagini gone, Lord Voldemort was, for the first time since he had begun tearing his soul apart so many years before, wholly and truly mortal. He no longer had any hidden anchor to hold him in the world. He could now die as any man dies, and there would be no coming back. There is something wonderfully fitting in the way it was done. The last shard of the greatest dark wizard the world had known was not undone by the most powerful, nor by the most famous, nor by any grand stroke of ancient magic. It was undone by the boy who had once been the shyest in his class, the boy who forgot his passwords and dropped his books and blushed at his own mistakes. All along, hidden inside that timid child, there had been a hero waiting, and when the world needed him most, he stepped forward and did the one thing that mattered most. It is a truth worth carrying with you into sleep, that courage does not belong only to the bold and the sure, and that the gentlest and most overlooked among us may hold within them exactly the strength the moment requires. Let that gentle thought settle over you now, warm and reassuring in the quiet of your room. The frightened boy became the brave one. The last dark secret was undone by a single clean act of courage, and all the long, careful labor of so many hands done in shadow and in hope came at last to its quiet completion. It is easy, in a story so full of great names and famous deeds, to overlook the slow and hidden work that made the ending possible. There were no crowds to cheer the searchers as they hunted the hidden fragments through danger and doubt. There were no songs sung for the quiet hours of worry, the long months of near despair, the small acts of trust that kept the work moving forward when everything seemed lost. And yet it was that patient, unglamorous labor, carried by people who often felt frightened and unsure, that brought the great darkness to its end. The world was saved not in one bright moment, but in 1,000 small ones, each of them offered without any promise of reward. And when the last of those moments came, it fell to a gentle boy with a shining sword, and he did not fail it. The serpent lay still. The final fragment was gone. And in the pale, gathering light of the coming dawn, the balance of everything had shifted, silently and for good. The one who had feared death above all things, and who had done such terrible harm to escape it, was now no different from anyone else. a mortal man beneath a lightning sky, with nothing left to hold him from his end. The way was clear now for the last quiet meeting, the final facing that would close the long story at last. But you need carry none of that forward into worry, for there is nothing left in it to fear. The hardest and darkest of the work was done, and done with courage rather than cruelty, and the world was very nearly whole again. Let your thoughts grow soft and slow, and hold close the image of that gentle, unlikely hero standing tall at the last. The night is almost over now, and the dawn is very near, and everything is drawing gently toward its calm and quiet close. Rest here a while, in that easing light, and let the stillness carry you onward. And so, at the very break of dawn, we come to the last meeting of all, the quiet and final facing that would close the long war forever. The night had spent itself. Beyond the tall windows of the great hall, the sky had softened from black to gray, and now to the first pale gold of morning. And into that gentle new light stepped the two who had been bound together since the beginning, since an autumn night in a small village so many years before. Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort stood at last face to face in the ruined and candlelit hall, before all who yet remained, and everyone who watched fell silent, for they knew that whatever happened now would settle everything. It is worth remembering, as we come to this last turning, how much had already changed in the hours before. Every hidden fragment of the Dark Lord's soul had been found and destroyed. The great serpent Nagini, the final living shard, had fallen beneath a brave and certain stroke, and so Lord Voldemort was now wholly mortal. A man like any other beneath the lightning sky, though he did not yet fully understand it. And there was another truth at work in that hall, a quiet truth about a wand that would decide the ending more surely than any spell. For the wand that Voldemort carried was the Elder Wand, the most storied wand in all the long history of magic, said to be the most powerful ever made. It had passed from hand to hand across the centuries, and its allegiance was a strange and subtle thing, for it was loyal not to whoever held it, but to whoever had truly won it. Voldemort believed the wand was his, and he had gone to great and terrible lengths to make it so. But the wand's true loyalty, through a long chain of chance and choice that neither of them had planned, had come to rest with Harry, and not with the Dark Lord at all. The most powerful wand in the world, whatever hand held it, belonged in its heart to the young man standing quietly across the hall, and it would not turn against the one it had chosen as its master. The two of them circled slowly in the growing light, and Harry spoke plainly of all that had happened, of the Horcruxes undone, of the wand's true master, of the choices that had brought them both to this final morning. He offered, even now, at the very end, a chance for the other to feel some flicker of remorse, to turn back, however late, from the long road he had walked. But the one who had once been the boy called Tom Riddle could not turn back, for he had spent his whole life fleeing the very idea of death, and had hollowed himself out in the fleeing, and he had no softness left in him to answer such an offer. He knew only power, and he reached, as he had always reached, for the killing curse. And so it came, that final casting. Lord Voldemort raised the Elder Wand and spoke the words of the killing curse, the same green light that had begun this whole long story in a nursery in Godric's Hollow, aimed now at the young man who had survived it once before. And Harry, in that same instant, raised his own wand and cast not a curse, but only a disarming charm, the simplest of defenses, the same gentle spell a student might use to knock a wand from a rival's hand. He did not answer death with death. He answered only with the wish to disarm, to take the weapon and end the harm, and nothing more. The two spells leapt across the space between them and met in the air, and there, for the space of a breath, they hung together, gold against green, in the pale light of the dawn. But the Elder Wand knew its true master, and it would not do what its false owner demanded. It would not strike down the one to whom it truly belonged. And so, in that meeting of spells, the killing curse turned. It rebounded from the wand that would not serve against its rightful master, and it flew back upon the one who had cast it. There was no long struggle, no drawn-out agony, only that swift and simple reversal, the dark magic returning quietly to its source, as though the world itself had gently corrected a wrong. And Lord Voldemort, who had feared death above all things, who had torn his own soul to pieces and done such terrible harm to escape it, who had fled from his own mortality across every year of his long and shadowed life, fell at last to the floor of the great hall and lay still and moved no more. He fell like any mortal man. That is the truth at the heart of this ending, and it is a strangely peaceful one. For all his terror and all his power, for all the fear he had spread across 2 long wars, in the end, he was only a man, and he met the ordinary end that he had spent his whole life running from. There was nothing left of him to come back. Every anchor was gone, every hidden fragment undone, and the long dread that had hung over the whole world lifted in a single quiet instant, like a shadow passing off the face of the land when the sun at last climbs clear of the hills. For a moment the hall was utterly still, as though no one could quite believe that the thing they had feared for so long was truly finished. And then the stillness broke, not into fear, but into something that had been held back for years. A great and trembling release, a rising tide of relief and grief and joy all tangled together, as those who remained understood that the war was over. It was over. The long night had ended, and the sun had risen, and the shadow that had darkened so many lives was gone from the world for good. Let that great easing settle over you now, in the safety and warmth of your quiet room. For there is a deep comfort in the way this ending came. It was not cruelty that finished the cruelest of all, and it was not hatred that answered hatred. Harry cast only a disarming charm. He reached only to take away the weapon, not to kill, and it was the dark magic itself, turned back by a wand that knew its true master, that brought the Dark Lord down. In the end, the one who had lived by killing was undone by his own killing curse, and the young man who faced him chose, even at the last, the gentler path. That, too, is a truth worth carrying softly into sleep, that even at the very end, one may answer darkness without becoming it. The green light was gone. The fear was gone. Beyond the shattered windows, the sun was climbing now into a clear and gentle sky, and the first true morning in a very long time was spreading its pale gold light across the wounded castle and the weary, living people within it. The long war, begun on an autumn night so many years before, was finally and truly over, and nothing of its dread remained to trouble anyone ever again. So let your own breathing slow, and your own thoughts grow soft, and feel how good it is that the shadow has lifted and the dawn has come. There is nothing left now to fear, nothing left to guard against, only the quiet aftermath and the long, healing years that lie ahead. The hardest part of the whole story is behind us now, and what remains is only rest and remembrance and peace. And so the night carries us gently toward its close, into the soft light of the morning after, where all that is left is to lay the lost to rest and let the world begin, slowly and tenderly, to heal. And so we come, softly and without hurry, to the last of our gentle telling, to the quiet light that spread over the world after the battle, when the fear had lifted and only healing remained. The castle stood wounded but standing, its towers scarred, and its walls broken in places, its windows shattered, and its stones darkened by the long night. And yet it stood, as it had stood for 1,000 years, and would go on standing for 1,000 more. And within its battered halls the living moved slowly among the fallen, with tears upon their faces and a strange, worn peace settling over them. The peace that comes when a great struggle is finally over, and there is nothing left to do but to rest and to remember. The sun had risen fully now, and its warm gold light poured in through the broken windows and lay across the floor of the great hall, where the fallen were mourned and honored, and their names spoken aloud with love. Families sat close beside the ones they had lost, no longer in terror but in tenderness, holding hands and sharing memories, letting the first waves of grief move through them as they must. And though the sorrow was very great, it was no longer sharpened by fear, for the danger had passed, and those who remained could finally begin to grieve in peace, which is its own kind of mercy. Let us hold their names once more, gently, as we have held them all through this long and quiet night. We remember Lily and James Potter, who gave their lives in Godric's Hollow so that their son might live, and whose love became a shield that no curse could break. We remember Cedric Diggory, brave and gentle in a distant graveyard, and Sirius Black, who slipped beyond a whispering veil, still half smiling, and Albus Dumbledore, who chose his ending atop a tall tower with calm and with mercy. We remember Charity Burbage, lost for the simple crime of kindness, and Hedwig, the loyal snowy friend of every journey, and Alistair Moody, the old and watchful guardian beneath a dangerous sky. We remember Dobby, the free elf who died content in the arms of the friend he loved, and Severus Snape, whose secret heart held a love and a courage that no one had guessed. We remember Fred Weasley and the laughter that echoes on still, and Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks, who left behind a child to be raised on stories of their bravery, and young Colin Creevey, who came back too soon and gave everything he had. We keep, too, all those gathered side by side in the candlelit hall, and we let each name settle softly into the quiet, spoken once more with love and then gently set down. For that is what the living did in the long days after. They mourned and they honored, and slowly, so slowly that at first they hardly noticed it, the world began to heal. The broken walls were mended, stone by patient stone. The shattered windows were made whole. The dark that had spread so far drew back, and light returned to places that had long known only shadow. And children who had grown up in fear began, little by little, to grow up in safety instead. Healing is a quiet work, and a slow one, but it is sure, and it came at last to that wounded world as surely as spring comes to a frozen field. And Harry Potter, who had carried so much for so long, laid down at last the burdens he had borne. The Elder Wand, the most powerful wand in all the world, the wand that so many had killed to possess, he chose not to keep. He wanted no part of the power it offered, and he laid it quietly to rest, choosing instead the ordinary wand that had always been his own, and choosing, above all, an ordinary life. He did not want glory, and he did not want dominion. He wanted only what had been taken from him so long ago in Godric's Hollow, a home, a family, and the simple, precious peace of ordinary days. And that, in the end, is what he found. For in the long and gentle years that followed, the friends who had fought and suffered together grew older, as people do. They mended, and they laughed again, and they built lives out of the quiet, ordinary things that the war had taught them to treasure above all else. They married, and they made homes, and they raised children of their own, children born into a world made safe by all that had been given for it. The grief never wholly left them, for such grief never does, but it settled into something softer with the passing years, a tender remembering woven all through the warmth of their new and peaceful lives. And then, 19 years after that long night, upon a bright and busy railway platform wreathed in the steam of a scarlet train, a new generation gathered to begin the journey that so many had begun before them. The sons and daughters of those who had fought stood among the crowd with their trunks and their owls, half eager and half afraid, ready to leave for the same school that their parents had loved and defended. They carried the names of the lost with them, some of them given those names in memory and in honor, so that the ones who had fallen would live on not only in sorrow, but in the bright new lives of children who had never known the war. The lost were carried forward, gently, into a kinder and a gentler age, and the world that had cost so much to save went on, whole and warm and at peace. There is a particular sweetness in that image of children setting out for the same school that had once been a battlefield, now returned to what it had always been meant to be, a place of learning and wonder and gentle mischief, of firelit common rooms and long feasts beneath the enchanted ceiling. The great hall that had held the fallen in candlelight held, once more, the ordinary happy noise of students at their supper. The corridors that had thundered with spells grew quiet again, filled only with the soft footsteps of children hurrying to their lessons. Life had returned to the old stones, plain and warm and full of promise, and that return was itself a kind of victory, quieter than any battle, but far more lasting. All was well. That is the truth at the end of the long story, and it is a truth to rest upon. After all the loss, after all the courage and the sacrifice, after the long dark years and the terrible night, the world came at last to peace, and those who remained were safe, and the children grew up happy beneath a clear sky. Every name we have spoken tonight rests now in quiet light, honored and remembered, and finally at peace, and there is nothing left in any of it that can trouble you or reach you now. So let it all settle away from you, softly, the way the steam settled over that bright platform and the way the gold light settled over the healing world. These are old sorrows, and they are finished, every one. The ones we remembered are at rest, and the ones who loved them found their peace, and the world they left behind grew gentle and safe again. You need hold none of it. Let each name you have heard tonight drift slowly down into stillness, like leaves settling one by one onto quiet water, until only calm remains. You are safe, and you are warm, and you are whole, and nothing here asks anything of you now. Let your breathing grow slow and even, and let the last of the day dissolve like mist over a still and quiet lake. The long vigil is done. Every name has been spoken and gently laid to rest, and the world, in the end, was made well again. Let that gentle knowing hold you now, soft as candlelight, quiet as dawn, and let it carry you, little by little, down toward the deep and peaceful rest that waits for you. All is well, all is calm, and every name remembered here rests now, at last, in quiet and unending light. And so we come, softly, to the end of our quiet vigil. Tonight we began in Godric's Hollow, where Lily and James Potter gave their lives to shield their son, and we saw how their love lingered long after they were gone. We remembered Professor Quirrell, undone by a love he could not touch, and Cedric Diggory, brave and gentle in a distant graveyard, and Sirius Black, who slipped beyond a whispering veil still half-smiling. We climbed the tower with Albus Dumbledore, who chose his ending with calm and mercy, and we spoke the name of Charity Burbage, lost for the simple crime of kindness. We kept watch for Hedwig, the snowy friend of every journey, and for Alistair Moody, the old guardian beneath a dangerous sky. We remembered Peter Pettigrew, undone at last by a flicker of buried decency, and Dobby, the free elf who died content in the arms of the friend he loved. We stood in the high cold cell of Nurmengard with Gellert Grindelwald, and we watched Severus Snape give up his silver memories and the secret love he had carried all his life. We mourned Fred Weasley and the laughter that echoed on, Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks, who left a child behind, and young Colin Creevey, who came back too soon and gave everything. We gathered with the fallen in the candlelit great hall. We saw Bellatrix Lestrange stopped by a mother's fierce love. We watched Nagini and the last shadow of a broken soul undone. And at dawn, we saw Lord Voldemort fall like any mortal man. And then, we rested in the long, gentle years that followed, where the living carried every lost name into peace. There is nothing left now that you must remember. Let each of those names sink softly away from you, down through still, dark water, growing fainter and fainter until only calm remains. Every one of them is at peace, and so, tonight, may you be. You are safe, you are whole. None of this can follow you, and nothing here asks anything of you. Let your breathing slow, and let the last of the day dissolve like mist over a quiet lake. Good night. If this gentle vigil carried you toward rest, come back and stay with us. There are many more long, quiet tales waiting for the nights to come.